Hi, Brad.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Tracy, how are you doing, Tracy?
I'm doing great, Brad. I'm super excited to have you on the Get Phil
Thank
Voted
you.
In
It's a really
podcast.
great pleasure to be here. I'm really happy
Thanks
about it.
so much. Yeah, I wanted to mention my co-host Kathy was going to be with us today, and she cannot be here, so it's just us. You're stuck with me,
That's
but
fine.
hopefully we'll have a good time. And before we get started talking about all things Phil Collins, I did want to take a moment and just give a little history about you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I wanted everybody listening to know that Brad was actually born and raised in Philadelphia, an American. Somebody asked me, they thought you were British. I'm like, no, no, he's an American.
That's all right.
He,
Most people think I'm Quentin Tarantino. I get that very often too. Um,
I hadn't thought of it, but now that you say it,
yeah.
yeah,
I
I
was in
get
a
that.
restaurant once where they were so sure I was Quentin Tarantino. We got incredible service because they
That's,
thought I was Quentin Tarantino. And when I
that's
found out it wasn't, the service kind of disappeared at that point. But that's
you
neither
should
here.
sign autographs as Quentin.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Brad studied piano, voice, and conducting at the Hart School of Music in Hartford, Connecticut. And in 1978, he moved to Los Angeles to begin his career as a recording and touring keyboardist, arranger, and producer. In the 80s, Brad worked with a huge variety of artists, including, awesome bands like Supertramp, the
Hmm.
amazing Johnny Mathis.
Hmm.
And in one memorable weekend, which I know we're going to talk about, he worked with Donny and Marie and Frank Zappa. Can't wait to hear about that, Brad.
Right.
Since 1990, Brad has been the keyboardist for Phil Collins. He's been on 5 major world tours with Phil, done many recordings and numerous TV and radio appearances. In fact, speaking of radio, I remember you on Howard Stern when it aired, and I really can't wait to ask you more about
Oh
that
yeah,
because
yeah. I got notes about that one too.
oh, good. Yeah. In 1996 and 98, Brad performed with the Phil Collins Big Band on tour and provided 2 arrangements for Phil's vocal performances of The Way You Look Tonight and Always, 2 massive classics. So I'll look forward to hearing more about that as well. In 2010, Brad conducted the band for Phil's tribute to Motown going back. So much to talk about. In more recent years, Brad has toured in French speaking Europe with Michel Polnareff.
Correct.
And the legendary Johnny Halliday.
Oh yeah.
In addition, he's recorded with other major French artists, including Hugh Alfrey. I'm
It's a
forgetting the name.
Hugues Aufray.
Orfue,
Yeah.
Eddie Mitchell,
Yep.
Michel, yeah. Am I
Michel
saying,
Jonas.
yeah?
Oh, Eddie
Uh,
Michel. That's what they say. Eddie Michel.
Michel Jonas, and Sylvie Vartan.
That's right.
As a keyboardist, Brad has performed on jingles for Wells Fargo, SBC, Mervyn's, Home Depot, the US Army, Farmers Insurance, Fannie Mae. Gosh, Brad, is there anything you haven't done?
And
And
Sullivan
finally,
Show. Never did that.
which finally, which I think is really cool, you studied film scoring with composers Robert Drasnin, Craig Stewart Garfinkel, and Lee Sanders. Very cool. And you also created the Coal Mine Project Studio in LA in 1992. And I know that you started with just 2 digital audio tape machines back then. And so that must have been fun, 16 tracks of fun. But I'm
16
sure that
tracks that were never in sync. Because anybody who's had ADATs, they know what a hellhole that can turn into. Keeping several machines together in the same time, it's hard.
oh, I'm sure. And that technology is now, I think, pretty far in.
They make really excellent planters. The chassis of these things, you take the guts out, you can really put some really nice potting soil in there, and it's a very nice thing to
That's
put up.
fantastic. You could start an Etsy page or something.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right, my friend. Well, I'm going to get right into some questions. You do it all. You arrange, you compose, you perform. What's your favorite part of being a musician?
I think playing more than anything,
Sure.
I I fell into a gig where I could play a lot, but I had to play specifically for Phil, the specific kinds of parts that he wanted for his music, and that was really the definition of what the job was. And I was quite happy to do that. I think there's some players who have a hard time playing the same performance night after night and with very little variation and very little personal input to the stuff. Didn't bother me at all because I was there to serve the artist, and I've always felt that way about any artist I've worked with, is that to give the artist exactly what they want at all times and give it at a high level of competency at all times. And when there was a chance for me to sneak in a little of myself, I was able to do that here and there. When I snuck it in where it shouldn't have been, I was immediately called out on it, and it was taken out. But for the most part, I just enjoyed the sensation of playing real instruments with other people rather than sitting in front of a computer screen all day, just, staring at it and manipulating little blips and dots around and typing in stuff. I like playing actual real instruments with real humans. Even when I was in LA, going all the way back to the early 80s when I got started out there, the hardest part for me was the uncertainty of what tomorrow brings, because it's true for a lot of people and maybe for everybody in varying degrees, but for artists and people in the arts, tomorrow could be, as different from today as today could be different from yesterday and could be different from the day before or the day after. You never know what's coming. Many of my tours have come up with a phone call on a Wednesday night, and I've been in LA on Thursday auditioning. And
Wow.
it's the uncertainty. You have to learn to live with that. And the uncertainty, it goes hand in hand with what makes it great, which is the variety of stuff. All of the various artists and the various kinds of music that I've been able to work with over the years. This is the most delicious part of it, but there's a price, and that is the uncertainty of things. So I would say that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the French thing. So much French performing. How did that fall into place? And are you like a French speaker now?
I took French in high school for 4 years, so I pretended that I was a French speaker, even though by the time I got over to France, I learned how bad high school French is in terms of what it teaches you in the real world.
Yeah.
They don't talk like what you get out of a textbook. And when I got over there, they might as well have been speaking Hungarian, because I just could barely not understand any of it. But I kept working at it, and like any other talent, the more you do it and the more you're around it, the better you get, right? So being there for months at a time, my French did get considerably better. It all came about because of a guy in LA named Philippe Rowe, who was, I call him like the fixer. He's the guy who connects the American musicians with the French artists, and he called me to play on a project with this really great French singer-songwriter, sort of troubadour guy called Michel Jonas. And it was a stellar musical experience because the band was Steve Gadd and the great drummer Steve Gadd, one of my all-time idols, and Abraham Laboriel Sr. on bass, and Luis Conti.
Wow.
A couple of French players and lots of other studio guys from LA. It was recorded by the legendary Al Schmidt, who just passed unfortunately recently. Was one of the great recording engineers in history. So this was just a dream to do this project. And then we did a tour off and on for about 9 months or so, and then that went really well, and I was now plugged into the circuit. So anytime a French project came up, I was considered for it.
You were the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a French second personality somewhere down inside, because I get it.
Yeah.
You really kind of have to get it in order to work in a culture as unique as that.
Yeah.
It is. Their whole musical world over there is very, very different than the United States, and you just have to understand that and accept what it is and love the things about it that make it so special. Bill did the big bands over there. It was a bigger hit in Europe than it was in the United States.
Yeah, I imagine.
The Europeans get it. I mean, they just really get it, and they didn't feel like Phil was cheating them by not singing. They just really enjoyed anything that he did because it was from him. And they're that way with their artists too, and they're very flexible about the music, and they like all kinds of different styles of music. I think their musical culture is just more diverse than ours. Ours is pretty niche driven, And you know, you have to be put in a pigeonhole and stay there. And if you kind of peek around and do something that's not in the pigeonhole, sometimes they fight you, the audience.
Absolutely. That's so true in the US for sure. So who was your biggest musical influence growing up? And then also, what are you listening to today?
Yeah. All the music I learned when I was a very small child came from my father. And he was a fan of Broadway musicals, Tchaikovsky, and jazz. So
Nice.
that was the first stuff that I can remember listening to when I was maybe 5 years old, you know. And I just took to it. And I think the way that I came into listening to music as a little kid affected the way that I appreciated it as I grew older, because I knew right away I could hear things in Tchaikovsky, for example, that I could hear also in Rodgers and Hammerstein. There was, I think my ear was sensitive enough, and so whatever gift I have, it's this ability to hear really well and understand what I'm hearing. And the Tchaikovsky, little bits of Tchaikovsky would turn up in Rodgers and Hammerstein, and I would be aware of what they were. I didn't know what they were. I couldn't explain what they were, but I could hear them. And it was, you know, later that I learned to go chasing after the ideas to find out what they are. But I got into music that way, through that stuff, and then went through the usual cycle of 60s pop and all that. And then I turned into a snob around 7th or 8th grade and only listened to jazz and classical exclusively.
Wow.
And was so anti-rock and roll and anti-pop, it was a little embarrassing. I hate to even bring it up, but it's a fact. I'm not hiding anything here. The Beatles I liked when they first appeared, and then I lost them for a while, and they didn't get them back till Abbey Road. And
Wow.
I had to go backwards to catch up to the Beatles,
Yeah.
which I eventually did. But when I was in my snobby jazz and classical phase, there was all that stuff went right straight by me completely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think my interest in music came from my father, and I just kind of went into it on my own and found jazz and classical, and that's where I lived for a long time. Now I'm kind of gone back to just jazz and classical, mostly jazz, because I am studying my jazz piano really hard these days.
Oh.
You know, there's a great joke. What's the difference between a rock guitarist and a jazz guitarist?
What?
A rock guitarist plays 3 chords for 10,000 people, and a jazz guitarist plays 10,000 chords for 3 people.
Bravo. That's fantastic. That's great. I love it. Okay, so speaking of those people you probably made fun of, let's talk about Donny and Marie.
Well, there you go.
How is it that in one weekend you played with the one spectre to the other, Donny and Marie, and then Frank Zappa? I mean, what?
Well, I was the MD for Donny, musical director for Donny and Marie, for 3 years, I think. Excuse me, I'm just doing this because I dry up when I talk.
Oh, no, yeah, definitely.
And I had a dear friend named Chad Wackerman, who was Frank Zappa's drummer at that time. And Frank had sort of been in between tours and, you know, was sort of just laying low for a bit and was ready to reassemble a band to go back out on the road. Chad recommended me. And so I got a phone call from the legendary Frank Zappa.
Oh, wow.
Would I like to come and audition? And how you don't say no to something like that. This is what everybody's dream is in LA. And I was in somewhere like Minnesota on a Saturday night with Donny and Marie doing our little bit country, little bit rock and roll show that we did. And the next morning I flew back to LA and went right to Frank Zappa's house in the Hollywood Hills to audition.
Wow.
And I never thought and didn't even consider the fact that I would get this gig. I just thought this will make a great story someday. So I might as well just have some fun with it because there's no possible way I could get this gig. I'm not anywhere near good enough for it. So I did the audition, and the audition was really fun because Frank was keenly interested in Donny and Marie. He wanted to know every detail, every little piece of dirt and juice about Donny and Marie. I spent most of the audition talking about them.
Oh my
Frank,
God.
he just couldn't get enough of them. Um, and then he auditioned me by asking me if I knew any TV themes. And I said, yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think fast. And I said, yeah, I know Perry Mason. How about that? The Perry Mason theme. He said, okay, then play that. So I played Perry Mason. That's da 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 dum, da 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 dum. It's an old, like a noir sounding
Yeah.
thing. Anyway, and then he goes, okay, now play it like Mozart.
Oh, wow.
So I tried. I try to do that. And he says, okay, now play it like a reggae.
Wow.
So I did that. Then he says, now play it like Mozart, but also like a reggae. And obviously I got it right away. He was just trying to see what kind of flexibility I had. Was
Right.
and the whole time I'm laughing. I could not stop laughing because it's exactly what I thought it would be.
Right.
Right. This went on, and then he put in front of me this legendary piece that he wrote called "The Black Page," which is just an impossibly complicated piece that he looks to see how your sight reading is by making you read this. And I laughed out loud at it because I knew I couldn't possibly sight read it. So I stumbled through that as best I could, and then the audition was over, and we hung out for a while, and then he basically offered me the gig.
Wow.
And I was so shocked by this. I wasn't expecting to be offered it, and I got all panicky. And I said I'd have to think about it, which is not really something you're supposed to say to Frank Zappa, but I did. And I ended up not taking it because I was thinking that this gig might drive me crazy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that the pressure would drive me crazy. And I was just coming out of a divorce at the time, and I was in a very precarious position emotionally. And I didn't think I was solid enough to really take it. So I had to say no.
Wow.
I may be the only person in LA who ever did that.
What guts that takes, and kudos.
Well, it's but
for
either
knowing.
gutsy or stupid. I still haven't figured out which. Probably both.
Yeah.
I think if I had taken the gig, I would have gone down an entirely different road from there. But
What
he
year
did
was
give
that,
me a
Brad?
consolation prize. He let me play on one track on one of the albums, on an album he was doing at the time, and he let me hang out quite a bit. Yeah, I think we got along very well. Actually, I think I understood why he was a genius. It got to me very quickly.
That's
Why
amazing.
the legend is the legend. I caught on right away. And I really liked talking to him.
I'll bet.
He's a very, very brilliant guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a family man. I liked his family. He had his kids there, Moon and I don't know if Dweezil was there, but
Dweezil?
his younger boy. He was there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a great, great scene, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that I could play all this stuff. I knew how hard it was. And even though maybe he believed in me, I didn't believe in me at the time.
Hmm. That's a great story. And I mean, wow.
And I it was my brush with greatness. I was close, but I didn't dive in with all the way in because I didn't think I could really survive it.
Yeah.
Not because of the people, even though the people were very different than the usual kind of studio musician in LA that I was used to working with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I was one of them more than I was one of the studio musicians and didn't even realize it at the time, which is
Right.
possible.
Right.
But I just thought it was just so intense that I wouldn't be able to cut it. And I didn't want to
That's
embarrass myself or embarrass him.
right.
Now,
That is interesting. And I often think if I could go back today knowing what I know now, would I do things differently? I mean, you can't live like that because you can't, but
no, you can't.
interesting.
I think about it a lot, and everybody makes their choices, and you go down whatever path you go down. You've gone down as a result of all the different choices you've made over the years. You make a different choice, the path swerves somewhere. You
Right.
don't know where it's going to swerve. It could be much better or much worse, or maybe the same
Right.
but a little different.
And
But
you wouldn't be who you are today if you hadn't have done all that. So I mean, so it's interesting though. It's
it was a great memory and great. I had for a couple of weeks I was in that world for a while, and it
yeah,
was
that's
great.
great.
I fell in love with the guy. He was a genius. There's no other word for it.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think beyond our world a little bit. You know, some of the stuff he did was really, really quite. People weren't ready for it. I don't think necessarily. Some were.
eventually they were, and he was always somewhat ahead of the curve at all times. And by that time, he was working with this very elaborate digital synthesizer called a synclavier. Very, very expensive and very high end. Only a few people in LA had one, and he had an entirely tricked out one that he was using. And he was writing all of his stuff on the synclavier. So he took me into this control room and played me some of his synclavier compositions, and they were what I considered to be avant-garde modern classical music.
Yeah.
They weren't pop tunes. They were,
Right.
they were serious
Right.
compositions.
Right. Right.
And so I had even more respect for him there because his knowledge of music was profound, and he was. There will never be another like him. I guess that's the best you can say. He's a completely unique individual.
I agree completely. I'm going to be talking with somebody that you worked with, Brad Marsh, coming up not too long from now. And he worked with Prince. And I've talked with Brad a little bit. And we started the other day talking about Prince. And we didn't get there because he got interrupted. But I feel like not that Prince and Frank Zappa are in any way similar.
Oh, no, but they're similar.
Other than
They do have
genius, right? Modern day Mozart kind of people in terms of their amazing gift, and so yeah.
Well, the one thing that Prince and Frank Zappa have in common is that they saved every note they ever recorded.
Oh, wow.
In this vast archive of material, that 90% of which has never been released.
Wow.
And Prince recorded everything, and only a small portion of that got turned into product that got released. And the same with Frank. There was this endless amount of stuff in the archives.
All right. Well, tell me about what you're working on these days. What are new projects you're working on, or things that you're doing that we should know about?
Well, since COVID started, the live gigs have kind of dried up. I've only done a couple since then. So I took the COVID period of lockdown to learn some new skills, and I spent a whole year of 2020 and 21 learning this piece of software called Finale, which is a music notation software, and it is extremely complicated. It's like the Photoshop of notation software. It's that deep, and it's what all the professionals, particularly in LA and New York, use for Broadway theater and for movies and TV and anything that requires that is done for the pros. It's almost always done on Finale, and I wanted to be fluent in this software so I could maybe get some work doing that. And that's what I've been doing mostly in the last 2 years, is arranging for people and doing the music prep.
Wow.
In Finale.
That's amazing. That's so. Is that literally the creating of the bars of music and the notes?
It's turning sounds into musical notation that you could put up on the piano and play. Yeah.
Okay. That's
because the sound, the way most people work now is in a program which is known as a digital audio workstation. Pro Tools is one, Logic Audio is one, for example. They play in and it records their MIDI performance, which is a digital format of input information.
Yeah.
And they get the thing to play back. If once they assign a particular sound to it, they play back what they recorded, and they'll hear what they played, but what they played may not look right as notation. There's a difference between what it looks like when it was played in. It looks like little blips, almost like a player piano roll, little blips, and that has to be turned into notes, half notes, whole notes, bars, beats, rests, something that looks like piano music, really.
Wow.
And it's a language translation issue of turning blips and blops into notes.
Wow. That's a tremendous skill, and you have to have the musical gift, the ear.
Well, right. It helps. It sure helps.
Yeah.
It makes it a lot faster, but I know that there are some people who just can do this without even really knowing what they're hearing. They can just look at it and see it visually what it should be. And I can do that too, but I like to never get away from what it sounds like is really
Sure.
the most important part. So I've been working mostly in finale for the last year and a half, and writing arrangements for a couple of singers, and mixing. I do some mixing and mastering a little bit. So I've just been kind of dabbling in different things, but I miss the live playing. I'm trying to get my jazz stuff up to speeds where I can get out and play that. I did do one project in 2020. I guess it was 2020, when the beginning of the COVID thing, with the singer Arlo Guthrie. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, of course.
And another guy in LA named Jim Wilson, who's a pianist that I frequently collaborate with. They did a song, an older Stephen Foster song, I think it is, called Hard Times Come Again No More, about, in this case, about COVID. And I did the arrangement, and I did the track, and Arlo sang on it, and Jim played piano on it, and I played accordion on it, and
Cool.
Stanley Clark, the great bass player, played bass on it, and there were some other singers and a few other people, and there's a really great video of this on YouTube if you search Arlo Guthrie,
Okay,
Hard Times Come Again No More.
I'll do it.
It came out really quite nice, I think.
Oh, I will search that and maybe include a link to it
Oh yeah, please do.
when I share our interview. That's really cool. Okay, well, we have 1 million Phil Collins questions,
Yeah,
so
I
we
see
better
that.
get after them.
Should I keep it brief? I mean, I don't know what your time.
No, we have no time constraint. Let's just talk, because you don't ever do this. So the fact
Yeah,
that
right.
I have
That's right.
you, as you told me, you don't do this. So since I have you, let's go for it. So let's start at the beginning. You joined Phil's band in, I think, 1990, maybe a
That's
little
right.
tiny bit sooner. How did you get hired? What was the circumstance there?
I got into the Phil Collins band because I knew Daryl Sturmer from the Gino Vanelli band. I
Oh
was
yeah.
with him in 1979. That's where I first met him. And we became really close friends and stayed that way through the 80s. And I was always the first one to hear all the rough tracks he was doing with Phil. When Face Value was still in the recording stage, I got to hear the basic tracks and all this. I could hear where this was going to someplace very special and very new. So I was not much of a Genesis fan before that, but after meeting Daryl and really listening to it and getting exposed to it, I became a Genesis fan. And so I did see Genesis all the way through the 80s and did meet Phil early in the 80s. And he knew me, and Mike and Tony knew me. So by the time 1989 came along, excuse me, and Peter Robinson had decided he wanted to concentrate on his film scoring and not on touring anymore, he declined to go on the next tour. Daryl recommended me, and there were a bunch of phone calls and cassettes sent back and forth, and one thing and another. And then Phil called me while I was at a recording session, left a message. After hemming and hawing and making it sound like I wasn't going to get hired, he said, well, he said, I hate to tell you this way, but you're in the band, man. So that was a great moment. I remember it vividly, and I just knew that life was going to be real different after that. So that was
No kidding.
November 1989, I think. And
That's awesome.
that's how it happened. It was
That's great.
basically Daryl was responsible for me being in the band. And actually, Daryl was on probation for a whole year based on how I behaved. Whenever there was any problem with me on stage, Phil would look at Daryl like Daryl was my keeper somehow and responsible for what I was doing.
Oh gosh, that's great. That's awesome. Well, I think my next question was going to be, tell me about the first time you met Phil. I mean, I guess that would have been in the 80s with Daryl, but any good story there?
I only met him, a little bit. There was no hang or anything. I wasn't invited into the inner circle, but I did meet him, and I just don't think there was anything really particular about that. But the fact that he remembered me
Yeah.
When the next time I showed up, he remembered my name and everything. That was a nice gesture and a very good sign.
Yeah.
I couldn't say two words to the guy at the time because I was just too. I was like that. And but yeah, that's why when my name came up, he was familiar enough with me to trust Daryl's judgment.
That's
But
great.
no, I don't have any funny stories about meeting him in the beginning.
I love meeting him. Well, you did, I think, 5 world tours, if I'm not mistaken. So you did Seriously Live, both sides, Trip into the Light, First Final Farewell, and then Not Dead Yet. Some of those tours spanned a couple of years. How do you prepare mentally and emotionally every time you're going to have to go out on a tour? Because once you do one tour with Phil, I imagine that okay, next one's going to be, if not longer, and how do you handle that? What do you do to get ready for that?
Well, for me, getting ready was about the music. I spent almost all my time preparing the music and
Mhm.
preparing the synthesizers and the keyboards and everything, getting the sounds together, so that when I showed up at the first day of rehearsal, it was ready to go.
Yeah.
Almost immediately. He appreciated that about me in particular, that I was always very well prepared when I came in. Emotionally, I don't think you can prepare for it
Mhm.
because you get out there and it's like changing realities for a while,
Mhm.
and you don't really know what the reality is going to be. Particularly when you're out for a long time, things start to change in your psyche, or at least in my psyche. It's possible to kind of go a little bit nuts out there
I
because you're
imagine.
so detached from reality for the longest period of time. You start to behave weird, and I know that I did, particularly on the Both Sides tour, because that was the longest one. It was many, many long segments of many months
Yeah.
being away from home. And by the end of that tour, I was on Prozac. I was just, hanging on by my fingernails because I just was adrift, I guess is the word. I just
Yeah.
couldn't get moored. I was tired.
I'll bet.
And when we did the Around the World tour, that was 2 months in 1995, and that was 2 months that felt like 6 months
I'll
because
bet.
it was so far away, and yeah, and this is the pre-internet times, so the internet is like a tether to the reality, which we
Yeah.
didn't have then.
Right.
And after the internet came along by 1997, everything was quite different on the road. You just felt
Mhm.
always you had a lifeline to the real world. And
Yeah.
I never really had much of a problem after 1997. The durations were doable and sane, and I think even Phil didn't want to be out as long as he had been in 2000 in 1995, 4 and 5 on the Both Sides tour.
Yeah.
And the one in 2004 was just perfect because there were two chunks and they were separated by almost a year, I think.
Yeah.
And then on the Not Dead Yet tour, all the segments were not punishingly long. They were good, and so there really
Yeah.
was never a problem there. But your question was, how do you prepare? And the answer is, you can't, because it's just things are different. It's like joining a big, sloppy, dysfunctional family for a year.
Right. Schlepping around together. I hate going anywhere with a group. Like if you have to go to Disneyland, for example, I can't stand to go in a group because you have to just kind of accommodate everybody. And I can imagine a touring group is like that. Now, if you got to have a plane, I think that became easier.
That does help an awful lot to have a plane.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you're around everybody, and at some point, that you're going to start driving people nuts, and that they're going to start driving you nuts. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the proximity day after day after day, and everybody's got their little ticks and stuff.
Yeah.
You have to be
Yeah.
really centered and really grounded to stay on your feet during this long period of time when you're away from all the things in your life that ground you.
Right.
And I did better later on than I did in the middle 90s. I did just fine during 1990 because that was just like a year of dream for me.
Yeah.
But the Both Sides tour was definitely the hardest one for me.
That was tough. Yeah.
That
I
was
imagine what you're talking about is all the internal stuff, and then you take the external pressures of all of the emotion and energy from the crowds, right? I mean, it's not always focused specifically on you, but it is on you because you're on the stage. Well, no, but you know, you're on the stage, and then you think about how people like Phil or Celine Dion or Michael Jackson, people who have achieved at that extraordinary level where the fan focus is so intense, you have to wonder how they do it. And a lot of them don't do it well, or they have to step away. And so it's just very interesting. And I've enjoyed talking to a couple different people. Leland, I spoke to recently, and Lamont had some interesting insight. It's very interesting what you guys go through, because from the fan perspective, which is where I come from, I don't even think about that. But talking with you
as a fan, as an audience member, you see us once.
Right.
I mean, you may see us multiple times, but it's that one performance at that one time.
Right.
For the band, it's performance number 70 something, and we're not even sure where we are. Sometimes
right.
It's been known to happen, remember where you are. There was so much to do in what I was required to do. Those responsibilities were so great. I looked at it as almost like a Broadway show, because there was very little difference in the playing. There was very little difference in the staging every night, because Phil was, worked out his rap and the stuff he would do and all the bits of business and stuff, and that became kind of fixed after a while. So it becomes fixed and set to a point where you can almost do this on autopilot, like a lot of Broadway musicians do. They're playing the show while they read Time magazine. This is real common. Easy to fall into that. It's like a state of hypnosis if you're not careful. And so I try to find something every night that's different for me, to keep me in the moment, so I don't. And there have been some nights I can remember when I used to get almost like, it's like road hypnosis. You're just playing. Another Day in Paradise has the same figure over and over. Dum 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 da 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 dum. That's the main theme of the tune. So this particular night I was just playing, and I was trying to. I started thinking, I wonder how many times I've played this lick. So I started adding up the number of shows and the number of rehearsals times the number of times the lick appears in the song.
Oh my gosh.
So the song's going along, I'm playing it, Phil's singing the lyrics, and I'm just ding, ding, ding. Let's see, that must be about 25,000. So I finally came up with a number like 20,000 or something like that. That I had played that figure 20,000 times.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, this is dangerous, because I'm now light years away from the show.
What I'm doing.
I'm trying to do math in my head right now.
So you got away with it, though.
I got away with it, but boy, that scared the hell out of me, because I just thought, if I can get that far away from it and just let myself do it, then I have to work on some controls to not do that.
Oh my gosh. So I want to ask you about In the Air Tonight. But before I do that, I just skipped ahead. I want to talk about the evolution of In the Air Tonight, actually, before I ask the question. Right. So I saw in your bio that you are somebody who is credited with the vocoder. Mm-hmm. And I was having a conversation with somebody, and we talked about In the Air Tonight and how it's evolved live, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a musician, but I think maybe on the 2004 tour, I really noticed that it was really a production of the song. It wasn't just the song anymore. And tell me, am I right? And tell me.
You're right.
A little bit about that.
The first year in 1990, I just tried to sound as much like the original record as I could do. And there's a vocoder on the original track. But I didn't have the same device that they used. No, but in case the audience is curious, a vocoder is an instrument that combines your voice through a microphone and a synthesizer sound. It puts the vocal quality on top of the synthesizer sound. It's a talking synth. That's what it
So
really
is that like what Joe Walsh uses and like Richie Sambora, or is that something
Those are,
different?
I think those are called talking boxes. It's a different
Okay.
thing. They put this tube in their mouth and it makes the guitar go wow wow.
Okay.
It emulates the shape of their mouth.
Okay. So
This
different.
actually tries to put the speech that you say or the syllables and words that you say on top of the synth tone
Okay.
to make the synth have a speech quality to it.
Okay.
And each one of the devices that does this has a little bit different quality to it. So I don't know whether even what they used on the original record, but I tried to come close to that, and it wasn't as much of a featured thing as it became later on. Um, by the time we got to the '97 tour, I think they were. Phil let me have a whole feature for about a minute and a half before the song even began to just
Cool.
do this like sound collage thing with the vocoder and with synth sounds and really a little piece of introductory music that had nothing to do really with the song, just to set up the mood. And the lighting guys did their thing, and the lights were just moody and
Yeah.
atmospheric and all that. It became a production number.
Yeah.
Um, and the vocoder was a big part of it, but the vocoder was not as big a part as it became originally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, by the time we did the Not Dead Yet tour, I had put in all this sound design, and I had a little snippet from 2001: A Space Odyssey, was where the Hal goes, "I can feel it," which is the first line of the song, right?
That's
And
awesome.
I can feel it, and I just had this whole thing going um, for like a minute and a half, or almost 2 minutes of this, and then the drum. I would kick in the drum machine and start the loop.
That's
Everybody
cool.
immediately then knew what was coming.
Everybody was,
They started
yeah.
cheering. They didn't
Yeah.
really know up to that point, so it's a kind of a cool thing for the audience to not know exactly where you're going next. They know it's something, but they don't know what.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of production number that it became eventually. It was really the only feature
Yeah.
moment that
It
they
was,
had in
yeah.
the entire tour.
Anytime I ever saw it live, I'm always like, is he going to make it? Is he going to make it back to the kid? You know, because I don't
Oh
know
yeah.
why, if he does it on purpose to stress us out.
Oh yeah, he got so good at that he could just get there within like 1 or 2 beats of when he was required to get
Seriously.
that
And I'm
time.
always like, what if the sticks like happen to not be on the, I mean, like not
No,
going to
it was
make it.
amazing how he could do that. It was
I know. It
so
is,
smooth the way he handled that.
it is cool. So what I was going to ask you a second ago, it had to do with fast forwarding to come back for the US Open with
Oh
Phil.
yeah,
I think he'd been away, gosh, what, since 2010 or something. And
yeah.
he came back for the US Open. And I always just was very interested to know what was it like? I mean, it was Nick's sort of big debut on drums. I know he'd done some stuff with Phil with Little Dreams, and I know you did too. Phil seemed to be relaxed and having fun, but were there nerves for you, for him? How was
Not
that?
for me. I stopped getting nervous after 1990. In fact, I used to look forward to playing. I was more nervous waiting around. It was like the anticipation of waiting around was a little more stressful than once I was up there. I was always much more relaxed. Nick, I don't think he was nervous, but he was definitely ready. He was on top of it.
Right, let's go.
He was armed and ready, and we were just excited as all hell because of the fact we'd been away from it for about 6 years, and it was an incredible venue with all those people, and I'm a tennis freak,
Oh, me too. Oh yeah.
and so it was and Leslie Odom Jr. was the guest singer, and I think he did Easy Lover with Phil, and he's amazing.
Yes.
So it was a fantastic reintroduction of Phil into the popular culture again. I think it was a great gig to get. It was handled beautifully. Nick killed it as usual, and then I think it was because of that Phil felt more confident in Nick's ability to actually do a complete show. So that's when the tour was okayed, and off we went. Not too long after that.
That was cool. Was Phil nervous as best as you know?
I've never been able to think so. I don't. It's hard to tell because he always looks like he's thinking all the time, and so maybe, but I don't really think so. I think he's too much of an old pro at that point.
He's pretty amazing.
Nothing really phases him at this point.
Let's,
Or even since 1990. I mean, I never used to see it. It just looked like it was just great fun. Was what it all looked like all the time.
That's the impression I always got, you know, but I mean, when you have someone like him who's who's just such a multi-talented, I mean, just musician, actor, you know, all of that, he's just on and just, it's great, you know. But speaking of nerves, I know I would be nervous because I'm a Howard Stern fan and I've listened to him since he came to LA in the early 90s. You guys went on the Howard Stern show and I thought, you know, back then, Howard was still kind of, I think, a little bit abrasive and, you know, he's much better, I think, today. But I thought Phil handled him well. There were a couple times where Phil looked visibly annoyed to me. I just recently rewatched the interview and it had mostly to do with, I think, Robin. But I'm dying to know your perspective. Robin, the woman who works with Howard, who sits in that booth, Robin Quivers.
Oh, Robin Givens, okay. Yeah.
Quivers. Givens is the actress, yeah. Sorry. But you were a bit of a fly on the wall. You were there. You got to see it all. And of course, he talked to you and you were funny when you said C-O-L-E pronounced Sturm. That was funny. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So how was that? Tell me.
Well, I wasn't real surprised to learn that Howard's on-air personality is not really like his off-the-air personality. He was actually very nice. It was very polite to Phil, talked to him man to man, and with just a nice attitude. He was nice to Daryl and myself. They were concerned that we were comfortable and that the keyboards and the guitar and everything were sounding okay and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And the minute the commercial was over and he was back on the air, it was like, so what's the story with the divorce?
Yeah.
Because that's the Howard Stern personality. I mean, I'm sorry, but a lot of it is just an act. And Phil handled it quite well because I think he understood too that it's just an act, and so he was required to act as the person who's asked these really intimate personal questions and respond and not get pissed off about it. And I thought he did really well on that interview. But that's what radio is, all that stuff. Those guys have personalities. It's a shtick, you know.
For sure.
And he was. I never cared for that kind of radio myself. I never really listened to him, and it didn't appeal to me. And I understood after being with him for 5 minutes that this was just the act that he did. So
yeah, I think the person that we hear today, the Howard Stern show that we hear today, is probably a little bit more probably what Howard's like in real life. I mean, I'm sure there's, but yeah, he's quite a bit more tame. I think he's become sort of regarded by people as really quite a good interviewer. You know, he gets a lot out of people, but in a good way, not so much the negative.
Yeah, he's definitely capable of that and was capable of that then, but he
didn't do it.
Expected to be kind of nasty most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, ask really, really personal questions and just push the envelope real hard because that was the format that he was doing. And now he's an older man and, you know, everybody mellows with age. It happens.
That's true.
So,
That's
yeah.
very true.
But my disappointment was that I didn't get to talk to Milton Berle because he was up after us.
Yeah.
I only saw a glimpse of him, but I had an encounter with him with Donny and Marie in 1984 when Donny and Marie did a television special for Herbalife. Remember Herbalife?
Yes. Yeah, the healthcare stuff.
Yeah, the diet stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And we were on the bill with Milton Berle and David Steinberg, the comedian.
Oh, no kidding.
And Milton Berle had to he asked me, he came up to me and said, kid. And he really talked like what you think an old Milton Berle would go and say, hey, kid, do you know show business? And I thought, that's a really metaphysical question. Do I know show business? What he meant was, do you know there's no business like show business, the song? There's no business like show.
Oh, right. Show business.
I said, yeah. He said, all right, play it. I go, da 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 da. Slower. Da 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 da. slower.
Oh, jeez.
Da, 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 da. Slower. Now, when I say this line, and he gave me the cue line, you say, I want you to play show business, but slower.
Jeez.
So I did. We did the show. He was, decrepit off stage, and on stage he was 20 years younger, like a lot of these guys are at that age. They just somehow come to life on stage. Yeah. Very funny, very quick. I played the show business like he wanted. And then in the middle of one of his lines, our drummer, Nick, not Nick Collins, but Nick Vincent, a friend of mine. This was a turntable stage, and while Berle was on, we were on the other side of the turntable waiting to rotate out for our set, right? So we're all at the instruments waiting to go, and Berle said some line, and Nick thought it was hilarious. He goes, psh. So we get done with this thing, and before we rotated around to do our set, Berle comes stomping up to us. He goes right up to Nick, and he goes, look, if I want a ba-dum-bum, I'll ask for a ba-dum-bum.
That's fantastic.
And I was like, I don't believe I heard that. That's so perfect,
Oh my God. So it would have been cool if you had a chance to just kind of, mix it up with him again.
I wanted so desperately to do that, but it was just, he's actually wasn't very pleasant off stage, and I'll just leave it at that. But
interesting.
A lot of those guys are quite different off stage than they are on.
Yeah. All right. So back to all things Phil. Yeah. So I recently was trying to think about my favorite live Phil shows. Now, I didn't get to see the 82 show, for example, but I love the Perkins Palace video. I watch it endlessly. I think it's fantastic. But as a fan, for a player like you, what's your favorite tour that you did with him?
Well, I have to say right away, the Sirius tour, because it was the first.
Yeah.
And it was 9 months of a dream come true. So even though there were moments of drama, because I imposed them on myself, as we were talking about before,
yeah,
that was just 9 months of dream for me. So I have to say that one. The smoothest tour, I think, was 2004. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm concerned, the best band we ever had of all the bands we've had, and this is no knock on anybody personally, but I think it's the one we had for the Not Dead Yet tour with Nick. It was the best, chemistry-wise, was the best band of all the ones I've been in.
That's amazing.
I mean, Chester is a brilliant, brilliant drummer and was great. And everything, and I have not a bad word to say about anybody else at all. It was just one of those magical things. Chemistry is hard to define, but I think we had it the most on the Not Dead Yet tour. I don't mean to say that any of the other bands were not as good, because they were all great.
Yeah. And
great in different ways each time around. I mean, Phil never had less than the best players at any point. And there were never any weak links anywhere. And other than from a musical perspective, just from an emotional and an experience perspective, it would have to be the Sirius tour for me, because it was the first one.
Right. I mean, it makes sense.
I was only 36, and
the world was your oyster.
Yes, I was single. I was 36, and I was getting the gig of my dreams. I could tell my parents, and they knew who it was, and everybody stood up and took notice, because I was now playing in the bigs, as they say.
Yeah. It doesn't get bigger than
for me. It couldn't get better than that. And the other tours were huge, and they were great experiences, but that one was magical.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing. That's very cool. So are you a guy who has memorabilia from the tours? Do you keep things like, has Phil autographed something for you, drumsticks, tour jackets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I have t-shirts and jackets and some of the other swag that we had over the years. I have some of that. I have every single tour itinerary.
Oh, cool.
From everybody I've played with, going back to Gino Vanelli in 1979. So I got a whole shelf of these itineraries. I have all the passes and the laminates and all that stuff. photographs by the thousands, I think. Lots of recordings from the board, just live recordings from each night. Many of those, but not a lot of personal stuff. I never really. I have posters that have Phil's autograph on them from Montreux when we did the Montreux Jazz Festival a few times.
Yeah, those are cool.
And which we would get everybody to sign, all the players and everybody would sign these things. I have that, but I don't have a lot of, like drumsticks and things like that.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
I get asked for that all the time. People want them, and
right.
I have done in the past gotten some drumsticks from Brad Marsh.
Yes.
Given them to people, but not autographed.
Yeah.
I didn't want to abuse the privilege of getting him to sign things. So, you frequently have to ask him for a signature for somebody else. And I tried not to do that too much, if I can help it. It was just, I know how tiring that can be. Signing your name over and over and over.
I can't imagine.
I did that a few times, but not that often.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I can't imagine how many autographs that man has signed. Oh, geez.
When the ones that he cared about, he drew his little picture of himself with the drum kit, his little cartoon.
Yeah, I have a bunch of those. I probably have most of the autographs at home that he's. I'm just kidding. I have a bunch of those doodles. They're so cool. It's a thing that I love. That's fun. So this is kind of one of those too broad of a question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's Phil like on tour? Give us the inside scoop, because obviously what we see is the jovial, happy, they call him in England the cheeky chappy, just fantastically funny guy. But is on tour, he has said that he's quite the taskmaster, and people say that he's a workaholic and all that and whatever. Is there any inside scoop about Phil on tour that you could share with us?
Well, nowadays, because of his physical limitations and one thing and another, he's let go a lot of that type A reputation that he had for a long time. But up until the Going Back tour, he was full on 24/7 in charge. And he was his own musical director. He was his own personal manager, really, even though Tony Smith is the manager. Phil was the first one at rehearsal, last one to leave. We played many long rehearsal days, and he was a classic perfectionist. And I don't think it's fair to call him a taskmaster, because he tasked himself as much as he tasked anybody else.
Right.
But he was involved in every single aspect of the show, which is, and this is another one of the questions you're going to bring up later, but I'll answer it now, was about the difference between the Phil Collins of the solo band and the Phil Collins of Genesis.
Yep.
He always would say that he felt much more relaxed and had a better time doing the Genesis because he was only 1/3 of a three-legged creature rather than one guy making every decision in every aspect.
Right.
And he felt like it was so much easier to do that gig. I mean, aside from the fact that it's where he first came from, it's the first music, it has a special place for him that way. But just the mechanics of doing the show, he's only 1/3 of a trio rather than 100% of a solo guy.
Right.
So I would say he was a little bit more wound up and tighter on the solo band. From what I've heard about how he was with Genesis, he was a little bit let go a little bit and had much of an easier time, I think, because he didn't have to decide absolutely everything, which he was doing with us. So those tours of the Serious tour, both sides, Dance Into the Light, and First Final Farewell, I would say he was really full-on type A, just on it in every possible way. To the point where we would get notes during the tour. You'd go back to your room, it'd be 1 o'clock in the morning, go back to your room, and then you'd see this paper slide under your door. Phil's notes. for the show.
Is it really him at your door doing it, or does he?
No, he faxes it. This was when faxes were the thing. He'd fax it to the hotel, and they'd print it up, and somebody would go around and slip it under everybody's door. But you got your notes before you went to bed. And it would be like, Brad, you did this in such and such a song. Don't do that next time. Or you know, what happened in this song when this thing happened. And I thought, how can you remember all this while the show's going on?
Right?
In 1994, when we did the Both Sides thing, they had that enormous stage set.
Yes.
He had a little area where he had all his little stuff, you know, his pastilles and stuff. He also had a notebook and a pen. And in the middle of the show, he went over there and started making notes. You know, don't forget to tell Brad not to do that. You know, that kind of thing.
Hysterical.
And I just was laughing so hard because he couldn't separate his critical self from his performing self, even in the middle of the show. I thought that was really funny.
That's great.
I mean, I didn't think it was that funny at the time because it was usually me he was complaining about, but kidding, sort of.
I know.
Sort of kidding, exaggerating.
I know.
Yeah, he was very much aware of every single aspect of the show and what was going on, even during the performance.
I love that. If anybody had a little clam or a little mistake or something, you might get the look. You know, kind of lived in fear of that look. I'll bet.
Because you'd get the look, and it was really hard to read him sometimes. You couldn't tell whether he thought he was just kidding around with you or whether he was really angry.
Yeah.
Sometimes you couldn't tell.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a little bit of both. There's I think it's the documentary on the big band, and Harry Kim is doing something, and he says, "Oh, the local musicians want a break." And at first, Phil's kind of joking, and then he gets off the drum kit and says to the camera, like, "Want a fucking break?" I think is what he said, and I was like, "He's totally mad." And they left.
They may have been exaggerating for the camera. Possible, but
for sure. But I think there was a little grain of truth in it, and I thought that's fantastic because when the boss is working harder than everybody else, I mean, that's fun. You know,
the boss doesn't play a wind instrument, and you got to give wind instruments breaks.
Right.
When you ask me about the big band, I'll tell you about a chart that I wrote for it that didn't get played. What happened at rehearsal?
Well, and we'll get to that. I think there's a couple things that I was going to ask you about. Fun, goofy things like pranks on tour.
Yeah, I thought about that quite a bit, and truthfully, I just can't remember us doing that. I did it with other bands that we goofed around quite a bit with some other. Supertramp in particular was great for practical jokes. But I think this show was too serious a thing. Yeah. Even on the last show of a tour, you just couldn't disrupt the performance with gags and pranks. Yeah. So I don't recall that we ever did it.
So I went to the last 3 Genesis shows in London, and I think I was one of the only people to capture it. I was in the front row center, and all of the tech guys, you know, the drum tech, the guitar tech, they all came through and did the "We Can't Dance."
Oh yeah.
I was right there, and I happened to get it on video. And I think I sent it to a couple people. Some of the crew guys reached out to me just, you know, through Facebook, and I thought, I've never seen them clown around. You know, they just don't clown around, and it was really pretty neat.
They did that when I saw them too. To see Pud try to do that walk. I mean,
he's terrible.
Can't even be stiff properly. But no, I think what I'm thinking of is the kind of things we used to do with Supertramp, where they would put like for the encore, the crew would come out and put talcum powder all over the drum heads. So when he hit one, it would go.
Oh, that's great.
They put like molasses or something on the keyboard, so it would be sticky and ooky and all that. So we never did anything like that would actually interfere with the performance. Right. But yeah, they definitely did little bits and pieces of coming out and showing themselves. That happened a few times.
That did. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but nothing that would interfere with the actual performance.
Sure. And I know Arnold used to create quite a ruckus with some of his dance moves, or no, was it Arnold?
It
Somebody
probably
had
was
some hits.
Arnold.
So speaking of hips and dance moves, how about, I mean, I'm sure there's some ladies in the audience that did some crazy things. What's some
Yeah,
weird,
that was another question that you sent me
yeah.
that I thought about long and hard, and I was not able to think of anything in particular that I can remember because our audiences were pretty, you know, very well behaved most of the time.
I'm
I mean,
impressed.
I didn't see much drunken. I mean, they were drinking out there. You could tell, when the dancing got very spastic and there was some really weird kind of singing along. People were like yelling at the top of their voice singing. But nothing that would cause security to come and drag somebody out for being
No
too.
flashing or anything, nothing
I
like
don't
that.
recall, not in my time. Maybe in the 80s they did, but I would remember that, and I don't remember that.
Huh, that's interesting. I
I
would
might
have.
have been too old for that by the time I got into the band.
Oh,
um, so really, I'm sorry to disappoint everybody, but there really is nothing crazy about that. This band was not like that.
no, it was not. It
By the way,
wasn't.
that came. I have a theory about that, which is it's like I call it my theory of inverse proportionality between the seriousness and the significance of the act that you're with versus how much offstage hijinks and nonsense there is. And it's like the higher up you go in the food chain, the lower the incidence of hijinks because there's too much money at stake. So people behave. But if you're down here playing, and I did plenty of these gigs where I don't want to name names, but they're not, the A circuit or the B and C circuit, and
Right.
that was when there was more screwing around and drugs and alcohol and all that stuff because the gig itself wasn't as significant, perhaps. It was significant for the artist, and of course you have to do your best as a professional, but as soon as the show's over, people were going crazy back in those days. This was in the 80s, so the 80s had a lot to do with it too. But
Yeah. Yeah. It was way
nowadays, everything is so expensive, I don't even think this even happens anymore. It's too serious a business now.
Yeah, backstage is no fun anymore. Back in when I was a kid, like
Stopped being fun after 1994.
totally.
Yeah, it just wasn't the same. 90 was kind of loosey-goosey fun. But, and certainly by the time of the Not Dead Yet tour, there was like nobody backstage because they were trying to keep Phil secure,
Right. Right.
So there was
Right.
very little hang. It was just not the same. And now with COVID, it doesn't exist with COVID. There's
Exactly. Exactly. You just can't. I mean, even if you know the person, you can. I was talking to Brad Marsh, and he went to go see the Lyle Lovett tour with Leland and Lamont, and he knows those guys, and they weren't allowed because you just can't risk it.
They're in a very isolated bubble, and they stay that way. And I think if I were in that bubble with them, I would not like it that much. That's not that much fun. It's kind of clinical and almost scientific. You're performing, and then the wall of silence comes around you, and you can't be with people, and you can't have people back. And no, I wouldn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I saw Genesis in Charlotte in November,
Me too.
and I was not able to go back and see anybody. I couldn't even go down on the floor and say hello to Michelle Collin, the sound mixer.
Oh wow.
Because couldn't get near them. They were all so isolated and being kept away from everybody for obvious reasons, and I understood the reasons. I understood why, but it takes some of the pleasure out of it. I think a lot of the pleasure out of it. And
I agree.
fortunately, I was able to have breakfast with Daryl, Tony, and Mike the next morning, and that was very nice. That was really nice.
Aw, that's fantastic. That's special. That's very cool. I was going to talk to you a little bit about, is there a serious side of Phil and how's he changed over the years? But I think we kind of hit on that. I think there probably is a serious side of him all the time because he's just always working. But I think I'm going to move next to I told a fun story about Phil's sister, and she talked about when he was 6 and he did the talent show and he stepped out onto the stage in a little cowboy suit and was going to do a Davy Crockett song. And the orchestra started to play. It was a live orchestra, I guess back then that's what they did. And he turned around and stopped them and said, "You're in the wrong key." As a 6-year-old, first of all, the fact that he can identify that, you know. So the question is to me, he's obviously a tremendous musical talent, even from a young age. Is there anything in particular that really impresses you about his musical abilities that maybe a fan might not know, but as a musician really impresses you? Or as a fan?
Yeah, well, I can answer that both ways because I was such a fan of his drumming through the
as a jazz guy, right?
even as a even appreciating the pop style that he played. It was a very unique concept he has as a drummer. It's sort of R&B, but not. It's sort of R&B and Led Zeppelin somehow combined together. But he changed the nature of pop drumming permanently, I think. And what I remember about the first rehearsals we had in England in 1990 was that at one point he had to show Chester something on Chester's drum kit. Now Phil is a left-handed drummer, so everything is reversed. Nevertheless, Chester being a right-handed drummer, Phil could step up to that drum kit and play it, and it sounded like Phil Collins. It didn't sound like Chester Thompson.
Wow.
And I was just absolutely taken aback by that. And I remember saying to Daryl, I said, "Wow, he really does sound like that." Because I thought that a lot of that had to do with studio tricks and stuff. But no, he could take Chester's drum kit, which didn't sound anything like his own, and make it sound like him. Wow. And that's all in the way he was hitting the drums and how hard and where and stuff like that. Right. That's when I realized that ability is not something you add in the studio. It's there. And I have to say I was really knocked out by that. He's a natural. He's what I call a natural artist. Everything he does, his acting, his writing, when he wrote his book, the music of all styles, his way of being on TV as a TV personality, it's all come from one thing in him, his artistry. Mm-hmm. And he's a total natural. He doesn't even perhaps know a lot of what it is that he does.
Right.
I know that he does not read music.
Right.
And so all of it is completely instinctive and organic, I guess you could say. It comes from within. And so I would have to say the thing about him that is the most impressive is how big that organic talent is as a whole. It's enormous. And he only did a fraction of the things he could have done. He could have done a lot more acting, and I think he would have developed into a really first-rate character actor.
I agree.
That you'd see all the time, but he just chose not to go that far with it.
I agree. On the drumming thing, I recall hearing Phil in an interview talking a little bit about Ringo Starr and how he's quite underrated in Phil's opinion. And then he referenced, Phil doesn't seem to be a particular fan of Carl Palmer. And I don't think he is a person or anything, but he says that, Carl's quite technical. And I imagine one might say the same of somebody like Neil Peart as well. And Phil's comments were that the technical part of a drummer, that person who doesn't feel it, is just a technical drummer, as great as you think they are. But Ringo, he was saying, Ringo had that groove, I think, or something. And I thought that was very interesting. And I felt like, that's a special, for me, that's what I really liked when I watched Phil and his drumming and his performing. He has a thing. Even when he sings, he does this thing with his left arm and he's always moving his legs. It's like part of his whole body, and he can't not do those things. And I thought it was a very interesting comment that he made, and it made me think more about him. And so I don't know if that speaks to that organic thing.
No, it does. It speaks directly to it, because I think the thing about Ringo is it's the very same thing. Ringo is not a technical drummer. has never been a technical drummer, but
Right.
it's 100% feel
Yeah.
with him. And you almost always know when it's him.
Yes.
I mean, aside from the fact that it's the Beatles, if it wasn't the Beatles, you'd be able to tell.
Yeah.
And that is not technique. That is
It's
something else, an undefinable quality that comes from within. And Phil has, a surplus of that particular thing. Oh, there was something I was going to say about that. Keep talking, I'll remember it.
okay. Well, I was just going to say you can always tell a Phil Collins drum thing too.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
There's a Genesis song called.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to
go ahead.
I just remembered.
Go ahead.
It was the fact that Phil is a singing drummer.
Right.
Really makes a difference, I think.
Yeah.
Now Ringo sang some, but I would
Right.
also call him a singing drummer. A drummer who plays for singers. Don Henley is one.
Yep. Yeah.
They play differently than just a drummer who doesn't sing. I think it has something to do with where the song itself comes from. Because some drummers, I won't say a lot, even though I almost did. Some drummers play from the exterior of the song.
Right.
But they play it great, but it comes from outside.
Right.
Phil and Henley and Ringo and Nick, I'm very happy to say Nick is the same way, play everything from inside the song.
That's cool.
So Nick could go through this set and sing every single lyric on every song, and I watched him do it. He knows the song inside.
In his body, yeah.
That's what the song is. He's not just playing a groove that works at this particular spot, at this particular tempo. And there are drummers that don't know the songs intimately enough, the songs that they play. They just
Right.
know what they're supposed to play, and they do. But it doesn't come from a place within. And that's the thing, I think, that separates Phil and Ringo and, Henley and people like that from other drummers.
Yeah.
And you can tell. You don't really know why, but you can tell. Whenever Phil would sit down to play something, it was never in the wrong tempo. Never.
No.
He didn't have to be told what the tempo was. I know he used to occasionally play Easy Lover.
Huh.
And we did that at all kinds of speeds with different people and, whatever the mood was. Sometimes it was fast, sometimes it wasn't. When he would play it, it was exactly the tempo of the record. I mean, precisely the tempo of the record.
That's insane, right?
No click track, no metronome to set it up or anything. It just came right out at the right tempo because that's what the song is.
And that's him. It's in his body, yeah.
In his body, and it's in his heart and soul. Is that what the song is that tempo and only that tempo.
It's amazing.
I can just remember being amazed at that facility of being able to just conjure up the correct tempo naturally.
Amazing. Well, in all of the, I don't know because I'm not a musician, but the unique time signatures too. I mean, you hear that all the time. That Phil's a master of the unique time signature. The turn it on again being 13/8 or whatever that is. I think.
Yeah, but he doesn't know it's 13/8. He just
right because he just knows that it's the right tempo. Yeah.
That's what I mean. He doesn't know how to even write it out, but he knows how to feel it.
Right.
And, yeah. What's that? Fifth of Firth? Is that or Firth?
Oh, Firth of Fifth. Yeah.
Has all these time changes in it, and it looks very complicated on the page. But when you play it, it doesn't sound that complicated.
Yeah.
And so he knows how to play it perfectly, and he probably couldn't even begin to write it out as to which bar was which time signature. Tony could.
Yeah. Tony could, yes.
Phil, and I would say also Mike probably can't. They just entirely feel what it is.
Right. Which
proves that you don't have to know the math involved to have it feel good. But it also shows that you can know the math like Tony does and still play with feel.
Yeah.
So one thing doesn't exclude the other.
Well, and they're also so that I think that balance, that yin and yang of Tony, who's so extremely that way, and Phil, who's not that way at all, makes them beautifully just complementary, and why Genesis is so cool.
I was such a fan of Tony primarily because he never smiled when he played. And he's a lot better looking than me, so when he doesn't smile, he doesn't look like Grumpy Cat like I do. And
Yes.
I was jealous of that because he
That
could
dude
look
is like a
intense
super.
without looking disgustingly ugly like I do.
You do not look disgustingly ugly.
Oh,
Stop
I got a picture of
it.
me frowning behind Leland, and I didn't think I was frowning, but I swear to God, it looks just like Grumpy Cat.
There's some interview Genesis gave, oh, I don't know, probably for the Invisible Touch tour, and they're sitting, the three of them on this couch. And Tony's sitting there with his leg crossed over. And I'm like, this dude missed out on being a supermodel. I mean, he's so good looking. And he just doesn't even know. It cracks me up. Yeah, no, so you can't compare yourself to supermodels, Brad. You're very
Oh, I
handsome.
know that. Believe me, I've tried. I know it doesn't work.
Oh, you're
But
hysterical.
anyway, that's Tony. Tony has a great style on stage, and he can afford to not smile.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the best. But we're having such good conversation. Thank you so much. Um,
Oh, I'll just keep going. I'm having fun.
oh, me too. This is fantastic. All right, so we were talking, Brad, a little bit about Phil's, many musical abilities, and I think his musicianship really shined on the big band projects. I watched the documentary 1,000 times. I love it. Things about like he had to learn the brushes, and things like that. That people don't even do brushes anymore, and he had to learn the songs, even though he doesn't read music. And he talks a little bit about how, he was annoyed with Tony Bennett's people because they didn't get him the songs in time and he couldn't learn them because, Brad
Oh,
Cole could just read the music, right? But he couldn't. And I thought it was cool that he was willing to tell the audience, hey, I'm not going to sing. It was very ballsy of him. And so I think the project turned out really well and probably was a dream project for him. I don't know, but will you tell me about that? Was it a dream project for him and how was it working?
it was definitely a dream project for him, and it was for me because I was now doing the best of both worlds. I was playing jazz, which I love, with Phil Collins, which I love,
Yeah.
and big band, which I didn't get a chance to play much of in my career. Um, a lot of guys started out playing piano in big bands, and then they went on from there. And I just didn't do any of that. So I was very excited about doing it. The arrangements were all amazingly great arrangements by the top guys, including some really famous arrangers. Um, and Phil I thought he did a very decent job for a guy who isn't a jazz drummer.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage for a drummer who never really played brushes before to really do that, because that is an art form unto itself, which you can stir we call it stirring the soup, which is but when you get beyond that, there's nuance and subtlety and stuff that comes with many years of practice and so forth and so on. It's an entirely different technique than just playing with sticks. Completely different. And he did great, I thought. He did really, really well. He worked hard at it. I know he practiced like crazy.
Yeah.
And he did not read music, but he did create his own charts, his version of a music chart,
Yeah.
which he called Bish-Ba charts.
Fishball.
And Bish-Ba charts are like this. Ting, 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 bish. Ding, ding, ding. Ba! The kick drum. So you would have a little squiggly line, meaning play time, and then there would be an arrow. Bish! That's a cymbal hit. Then there would be another arrow pointing down. Ba! That would be kick drum hit. So they all looked a little like Egyptian hieroglyphics when you looked at the chart. There were all these little lines and squiggles and exclamation points and all this stuff, and it made no sense at all to me, but it was perfectly understandable for him. So that's how he worked it all out. He worked it all out by ear.
That's amazing.
Because we did a guide recording in LA with another drummer. In fact, the same drummer that Milton Berle yelled at.
Oh yeah.
Played
Nick.
drums on the Guide recording, and Phil learned his parts essentially from the Guide recording.
Wow.
And made these Bishba notes for himself. So when he came in to play it, he sort of knew what he had to do. And anytime he was unsure, he had the Bishba chart to look at. But it was just a great experience. I love the live album. I listen to that quite frequently. And in 2019, the Vine Street Horns and I went to Graz in Austria to do a clinic with their jazz program. And we did a performance of the Phil Collins Big Band with their big band guys, and a gal singer sang Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me and Always. And the college gave Phil an honorary doctorate.
I remember there was a recording of that. I remember that woman sang so beautifully. Yes.
Yeah, that's Miriam Colmer is her name. And she sang Always and sang Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me just fantastically, I thought.
Yes.
And, these kids played this stuff with a lot of soul. It was really, really fun. And then the Vine Street Horns were in the section, and Luis Bonilla was conducting because he's the teacher there.
Yes.
And the music just sounded terrific. I mean, it just really felt great, sounded great. This stuff really holds up, and it should be performed more often, I think. It's just good stuff. Good writing, good playing, excellent stuff for a singer to sing to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's...
And I wish we could have more opportunities to play it because it's just excellent material, I think. But the big bands were a great pleasure for me, and I think the high moment for me was with Tony Bennett. And not that I played with Tony Bennett, but because he had his own pianist, Ralph Sharon, who he'd been with for 35, 40 years. And I was impressed with Ralph Sharon because he's not only an excellent pianist, he's also a guy who's been doing this forever. And he was 70-something years old that year. And there he was schlepping his suitcase down to the lobby just like the rest of us. And I thought, man, this guy's kicking it at 72 or 3, whatever it was.
Awesome.
And, but between the changeover of Tony Bennett's set in the middle and then when I went back to the piano for the rest of the Phil set, there was a moment there where I changed over and Tony was talking to somebody out in front, like might have been Phil. And I started playing the music from a legendary recording that Tony Bennett did with Bill Evans, the pianist, in 1976. It's a classic recording of just the two of them. Bill Evans is one of the great jazz pianists of all time. And they did a song called Young and Foolish, which is a standard. And I learned this by heart years before. And I saw Tony Bennett there, and I just started playing the chords, the Bill Evans chords, right? Young and foolish. I just started playing these voicings, which are very identifiable. And Tony kind of turned around and looked over there. The next thing I know, he's at my side singing it.
Oh.
Well, I didn't hold it together very well. I was like weeping while I was doing it. And we sang and played the whole song front to back.
You're gonna make me cry.
And then he said, I got chills.
Oh. Oh.
And I thought, that's it. I can retire now. That's it.
That is something
it was really a great moment.
You will never forget that. That is so special.
Was,
thank you for sharing that.
And then the last thing was, after the last performance, he did his set in the middle and then was going to just split and fly home or whatever. And on his way out and my way in, he looks at me and he goes, take care, babe.
Oh.
I thought I got babe
great.
by Tony Bennett, and I actually played with him for about a minute and a half. What else is there left to?
Yeah, when you got kid from Milton Berle too. So I mean, you know.
Oh yeah, I've had my brush with greatness many times.
That's amazing. So the big band shows, Kathy, my co-host who couldn't be here, she did a bunch of shows on the big band tour. She loved it. She saw one of the shows that was in Cleveland, and Phil did sing a few songs, but she actually wanted me to ask you, Is it true that there were certain shows where he chose not to sing because he felt the audience just didn't get it? Or is that not true? And that's a
It's
rumor.
not entirely like that, but there were some times when he didn't sing. And it wasn't he was not being peevish or, vengeful about it. He just didn't think it would
Yeah.
work. Again, this goes back to what I said about the difference between European audiences and American audiences. The Americans didn't accept him not singing.
Right.
And I know that there was a certain amount of, they didn't know what a big band was. I just thought it was a big band. They didn't know that a big band is a particular jazz outfit with, so they're sitting there looking at the stage, and all of a sudden there's 4 trombones on stage, and they're going, what the hell is this, So I don't think they really quite understood what it was all about, and they almost always appreciated it when he did sing at the end, but it was not any of the hits. It was the 2 jazz tunes.
Right.
Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me and Always, and then also The Way You Look Tonight was another one that we did on the second tour. But I think there was some resentment among the American audiences that he wasn't singing.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't be sure.
Mm-hmm.
But, some nights he just didn't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
Not very often. He almost always did it. There were a few. I don't remember if Cleveland was one. I just don't recall. But
He did sing, and he did sing in Cleveland, and she had remarked that people were dancing in the aisles till do nothing till you hear from me, and that people were dancing in the aisles. And I thought, that's so romantic and sweet, and as a player on the stage, did it move you? Did you think like,
Well, it reminded me of what the big band era was like in the 40s, when everybody danced to the big bands. It was probably folks who were old enough to remember, or at least to understand what that was at one time. And probably they were drunk. I mean, that certainly helps. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I always liked it when the audience responded that way, because it meant that we were reaching them, in the most important way, which is emotionally. And I just think I was disappointed in. I know that at the Hollywood Bowl, for example, some guy threw a beer can at us.
That's
I think
awful.
it was empty. I'm not sure. At least it wasn't full. But he was pissed off that Phil was not singing.
Isn't that terrible?
Felt like he'd been misled, ripped off.
Ugh. Yeah, that's terrible.
And that was not the case in Europe. Everybody in Europe got it.
Yes.
That's one of the differences. But yeah, I mean, I think there is maybe a nugget of truth in that he just felt maybe he's a little unhappy with the audience not coming along with him, and maybe he did feel that, but I wasn't particularly aware of that.
Wasn't conscious. I was just going to take, I know you have a story about Peter Gabriel, because we're going to get there. But I was going to say the difference between American and European audiences. In 87, I graduated high school, and I was a big Peter Gabriel solo fan. And I saw, it was probably still the So tour, but it was before So really made that huge impact and went crazy in the US. And Peter used to do this cool stage dive, and I got to see him do it on the European shows. I went to like Copenhagen and Berlin and a bunch of shows, and the audiences were so different. You could walk up to the front almost at a show in Europe, and I experienced that. I went to like 11 shows on the Genesis tour, this last one, and you could actually people weren't talking and milling around like they do in the US shows. And I was in Boston at the Genesis shows, and the crowd was so unruly. I was actually I felt bad for the guys on stage, because
unruly
they were
during the performance.
Yes, I was just dying. And especially like when Phil, he does a lot of the setups at the Genesis shows. He does the Genesis party tricks, and he was talking a lot on this tour because it was their last tour, and people would shout out and talk over him, and I just thought it was awful, and I didn't like it at all.
I blame television for that, because everybody thinks TV, the whole of reality is a television show, and they think that sitting in an audience entitles them to yell at whatever they're looking at the same way they yell at the TV.
That's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, I did learn over the years how much hipper European audiences generally are, musically speaking. They just
yeah.
get it.
And Peter couldn't do the stage dive at the U.S. because they would grab his butt and steal his shoes. You know, he had to stop doing it. It's just, yeah, it's nutty. I find it interesting. The Royal Albert Hall show was the first show, right, that you guys did live, if I'm not mistaken. And were Mandela and those guys, or am I not remembering correctly?
No,
and the Queen.
it wasn't the first show. It was in the middle of the tour. And Tony Bennett was on that, and Mandela was in the audience sitting in the Queen's box.
Yeah. So you guys had done that.
It was great. That was a great night. And actually, Tony was amazing that night because he used to do a number where he would turn the sound system off and sing absolutely a cappella with no music. And he would do a song called Lost in the Stars by Kurt Weill from this musical from 1949, I think. And he sang into Albert Hall acoustically and just was spectacular. I mean, you talk about not hearing a pin drop. You turn that sound system off, everybody shuts up and they start listening.
And that was that show?
Yeah, that was that show. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Boy, could he belt it out to the last row. He was in really good form that year. And that was a deep moment.
Oh, yeah, that's special. That's amazing. Let's talking about conducting. In 2010, you were the conductor of the band on the Going Back tour, were you not? And what was that like? Lots more responsibility, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think he just got tired of it, and he wanted to just sing it and not have to deal with all the under the hood mechanics of getting it done. And so he just threw it to me to do. And all that was really involved was like counting off the tunes and making sure that the keys were correct. Because we kept transposing everything for Phil's vocal range. So a lot of the Motown songs had to be played in other keys than the original. And I found with the Funk Brothers, these legendary guys from the era of Motown, that they had a harder time playing the songs in other keys because they had done that so infrequently over the years. And particularly one guy, Eddie Willis, the guitar player, Eddie Chank Willis.
Yeah.
Chank. I mean, a legend, beyond a legend. He's on every one of those records, going way back. Eddie could not play the songs in other keys. He just wasn't that kind of guitar player. He knew how to play it in the key it was in, and that was it.
Right.
And he said a really interesting thing. He said, man, these songs don't groove in the other keys.
Wow.
And I thought that's new, because the key shouldn't matter, I mean, theoretically. Right. But actually, from their perspective, it totally matters, because the key is what makes the guitar sound the way it sounds.
Right.
You transpose it down, you've got a whole other instrument in your hands. It's not ringing or sounding the same way at all. And from Eddie's perspective, it just didn't feel right or sound right. And so he just couldn't do it. And Daryl had to play some of those songs himself. Bob Babbitt, the bass player, had to have certain bass lines written out in the new key. And he had to read them and learn them in the new key. He couldn't just move his hand down one fret and do it. He just had to relearn it. And I remember writing all of his bass parts into the notation software I was using so it would be easy to transpose. So that was one of the things I had to do as MD, was remember which key we were in on which day, because we kept moving them down quite frequently when Phil would come.
Oh, interesting.
But I'm not one to go telling legendary musicians what to do. So I deferred to them almost all the time about choices about what to play and how to play it and so forth. And basically all I did was just run the songs. I think a musical director does the best job when he backs away and lets everybody do what they do. A lot of times MDs feel they have to earn their salary by sticking their nose in everybody's business to show that they're there and doing it. And I think it's better to just, you've got professionals, you've got really good people, let them do their thing.
Yeah.
If they have a question, they'll ask you, and if they get start to go astray, you can help them come back. Otherwise, leave them alone. Let them do what they're there to do. So I developed a reputation as a pretty easygoing MD, which is very shocking if you knew my earlier personality as a maniac.
But previously, Phil would have served in that role. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he would make all those decisions. You know, he would listen. He would perform and listen. So he was both performer and conductor at the same time. And he wasn't waving his arms around, but he was doing the other job of the conductor, which is to evaluate what's going on and make musical decisions. He was trying to do that while he was performing, and I frankly don't think you can. And it's just a lot of work, and I think he just finally got tired of it.
Right.
So from that point on, he mostly let me do all that nuts and bolts kind of stuff, and which is much more like a lot of other artists who don't even come into rehearsal till everything is kind of together, and then they show up. But you know, Phil was always in on day one, you know, dabbling and getting stuff organized and figuring stuff out. Later on, it was more like, you do it, me, I do it, and he would come in and sing, which is the way it really should be, I think, at that point, because the band knows what to do.
Sure.
99 times out of 100.
Yeah, especially that kind of music, none of which he actually wrote. So, I mean, I think that made more sense too. If he wrote something, then I think, you know, but my next question that I'd written was, it's my understanding Phil wanted to try to recreate the songs as much as he could as they were originally, but because you had to change those keys, I mean, was it a struggle? Was there a constant?
The only person who had a hard time was Chester. And because, I mean, Phil was very aware of how much the original drum sound, and not only that, but the original drum performance of those Motown songs, how important that was to the song. I mean, there's certain drum fills that are required in certain songs. You just have to play them. They're part of the legend of the song, right? And I think Chester, he did it, but I don't think it came as easy to him as some other things might have come. I think he wasn't used to imitating another drummer.
Right.
The way that this had to be more than just an imitation. It had to be almost exactly the same. So he had the hardest responsibility of all of us in the band, was to match something that came before. I mean, the keyboard parts and all that stuff were really basic, and it was pretty hard not to do it right. And there was me and Bill Cantos both on keys.
Mm-hmm.
So that part of it was pretty easy. I mean, for me, the hard thing was imitating some of the old orchestration stuff, like Tears of a Clown has a bassoon, and some string parts and some other songs. And there's some things I had to play with sampled instruments to imitate that sound. And I worked pretty hard at trying to match as close as possible to the original sound. So there was a lot of, as usual, a lot of what I call gymnastics in the performance. Which sound is at which point on the keyboard, where are they? You know, laying it all out. There's a lot of, you know, tap dancing going on, trying to get everything laid out to be played in real time.
Yeah.
But the actual musical part of it was really easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was real groove-oriented stuff. It's great, easy.
Yeah.
But Chester, I think, had the hardest, was under the microscope the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would say he had the hardest task for him was having to tailor his playing to almost note for note somebody else's style,
which would be hard. And I know that yeah, there was
not that easy to do, you know. But so from my perspective, my gig wasn't that terribly hard.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was very well received, I think, and kudos to you. I think you do deserve credit for the live performance. I think we're quite critically well received. So congratulations on that. So I think I now want to move a little bit to the Not Dead Yet tour. I was surprised, but delighted that Phil decided to do it. Were you surprised, or did you kind of have that vibe, you know? I
felt it happening in 2016. I kind of felt like we were starting to head towards something. I didn't know what, and I didn't know how extensive it would be. No, I actually thought it would just be a one-off thing in 2017.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Europe, maybe the States, and that would be about it. But it turned into 3 years of different segments.
Yeah.
South America, Australia, a couple of Europes, a couple of USA ones. And I think the motivating factor was Nick.
Yeah.
He's come out and said this almost directly, that he wanted to do this for Nick to have the experience of doing it. So I'm glad that Nick was the motivating factor, because it did make everybody step up a little. And Phil stepped up too.
Yeah.
But Nick was phenomenal. I've never seen anybody grow the way he grew between 2017 and 2019. It was incredible to watch.
Wow.
This kid worked so hard. He's one of the great students I've ever seen. He just wanted to know everything there was to know about not only drumming, but about touring and about the songs and the production of the songs. And he was not averse to getting advice from us geezers who'd been around a while. He's got the greatest personality. He's such a well-behaved and well-spoken young man. He's just a beautiful guy. And no ego that I can detect. He's just all in for the music.
Yeah.
And I think he's got a great career ahead of him. He's a singer's drummer, like I said before, and I think that's a rare commodity and highly in demand, and will always be.
Yeah, and well, I think it's Nick that, and I think a little bit of Mike Rutherford having appeared at a few of the Not Dead Yet shows that made the Genesis tour happen,
Absolutely,
which
I think it did.
None of us thought would happen, and so that was, you know, and
no,
boy,
I'm sure that Phil was different when Mike was there.
was he?
Yeah,
in
he
a
was
good way.
a little bit sharper when Mike was there.
Wow,
And
that's
again,
cool.
I think that also has to do with the fact that here's 2/3 of the original trio. I can ease up for a second because Mike's here. And when he did ease up, he always did better when he eased up. And,
Sure.
but I think he enjoyed it so much that was the nugget that sparked the whole Genesis reunion thing.
Oh,
Also,
so-
the fact that Nick could do it.
Yeah, no, Nick, we all Genesis fans love Nick, you know, we're like, thank you.
It's amazing. Nick's just, I don't know, there's really not the right words to say, but he's an incredible guy.
He seems to be his father's son in that regard, you know, where he doesn't have I don't know, because I don't know Phil personally, but he doesn't strike me as someone who has a massive ego. I mean, he doesn't appear to anyway. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
well, I don't think either one of them has a massive ego when it comes to the idea of being on stage and doing stuff.
right.
Nick in particular is 100% about the music.
Yeah.
But I watched his abilities just grow and grow, and when I saw him with Genesis, he grew even further. From
Unbelievable.
Not Dead Yet tour, his technique got better and better, and he's only 21, I think, or maybe he's
just
22.
turned. Yeah, it's
21,
unbelievable.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, 21. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to remember what I was doing at 21, but I know it wasn't that. Probably wandering around in a haze trying to figure out what the hell to do with myself.
Me too.
Yeah, and
I mean, honestly.
he's really brilliant. He's a great kid. I'm sorry to call
No,
him.
that's cool.
He's a great young man.
Either way, you're saying it in a kind way.
Well, yeah, I'm saying it in a Milton Berle way.
Milton Berle, yes. So
Anybody under 40 was a kid to him. So
right. Good old Uncle Milty. So something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it has to do with something Lamont Van Hook shared with me, and it's this notion that, well, I guess the question is, there were, on the Not Dead Yet tour, there were some shows, I think in South America, that had like almost, I think, 90,000 people, which is insane. And I talked to Lamont a little bit about this, and I just wonder about it for you, and then maybe your perspective for Phil. And we touched on it way earlier in the interview, having all of that attention directed specifically on Phil for all of these years, right? He's the singer and in Genesis, and having 90,000 people's energy focused on you. I can't even imagine what that's like. Now, you experience it a little bit on the stage. It's not directed directly at you. And it all came from this thing that George Shelby shared. He was on stage in maybe Paris or Brazil during against all odds on the Not Dead Yet tour, I think. And everybody in the audience had their phones and they were all singing, and they were singing louder than Phil. And it was a video that he shared from his perspective. And it moved me to the point where I started to cry because I thought it was spectacular. And I thought, God, what it must be like to be on the stage having that. But then Lamont said the intensity of that emotion can be overwhelming. And it was for him when they sang, Phil rallied the troops for his birthday one tour, I think in Paris, he said. And he said it was so overwhelming for him. People were directing all that emotion at him. And it's just a notion that I've been really interested in. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on it for you as a player. Does it affect you that way? And how do you think that it affected Phil over his lifetime, perhaps? Big question, and maybe we don't get there.
If I had to look at the situation from strictly an audience member, I would say Phil, with, you know, if you look at the artist sitting or standing center stage, there is this, you know, rays of energy coming from the audience, and they're all coming to that one point. It's like a lens almost. I've never had that privilege. I don't know what that feels like. Guys like Shelby and Daryl, and guys who get a moment in the sun to do their solo, they get that for a minute. And also they get it because they're on their feet and they're visible and they're moving around. I always have said that I think that people only hear what they see. And because the keyboard is not a physical instrument, for one thing, I'm sitting down almost all the time. A lot of guys like to be on their feet when they play. I just can't. I need to sit. And so it's not a physical performance. In fact, it doesn't look like anything is going on. So I don't know what it's like to have all those rays of energy focused on me. But I think what I've seen from Phil is that he was better with that energy than without it. So that it didn't make him nervous. It actually gave him, it was like soul food, you know, it gave him strength. And I would imagine that's true for almost any artist that has to deal with that day in and day out. They get energized by it. Now, an audience can turn on you and send negative rays the same way. Well, that never happened with us. I never saw that, but it can happen. But I mean, we get as the players, particularly myself, you get the little side energy that's off to the side, and that's why I always like to look at audience members and see if I can make some eye contact with anybody, because I want to feel like, hey, they see me, they know I'm here. They hear me, but they might not know where it's coming from. It could be coming from a backing track, you know. As far as the size of the audience, I tend to feel the bigger the audience, the less real it gets, the further away they are. So in other words, like with Supertramp in Brazil, we had 150,000 people in a soccer stadium, I think it was, or something in Brazil. Just unbelievably huge. There were so many people, and they were so far away, it felt like they weren't at our show. They were like way the hell over there, you know. So I only related to the faces I could see, which wasn't many, maybe the first 5-6 rows of people. Everybody else is just a blur. And you get the energy from them with their cheering and applause, and particularly that show, there was just a ton of that. But it doesn't make me more or less nervous. I don't think it makes Phil more or less nervous. I think he's the same way. He probably plays to a handful of people here and concentrates on them, and everybody else gets it, but he doesn't think about the guy up in the last row on the top balcony. So yeah, the energy comes, but it doesn't make me nervous. I don't think it makes anybody on stage nervous. It makes, to get a positive response, energizes the show. But you know it's sort of for you, but it's more about it's for the entire performance, mostly for the artist, Phil in this case, somewhat for the band, but not specifically for any one of us, unless we have a solo moment like Daryl's many solos in the show. You know, he gets cheers after he plays because he's out front, number one, and he's visible, and he plays great, and the solo is something that's part of the song.
Yeah.
So all that energy is momentarily directed to him.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the Peter Gabriel story I wanted to tell, which was about the feeling of trying to be involved in something when there's so much on stage to occupy people's attention. You sometimes don't know that you even exist in the show. And that was a particularly tough one in the Both Sides tour, because that everything was like camouflaged with stuff, and it looked like my keyboard rig was surrounded by a pile of garbage the way it was designed. There were trash cans and all this junk.
Yeah.
So you really couldn't tell it was a keyboard rig back there. So we did the first half of this show. I can't remember where. It might have been Wembley or something like that. And at the intermission, I went backstage, and there was Peter in the green room.
Mm.
And I had never met him, so I went up and I said, Peter, I'm just so pleased to meet you. I've been a fan, and I admire your stuff so much. It's just a great pleasure to meet you. He goes, oh, yeah. Who are you? And it took about a week for me to recover from that, because not only did the audience not see me, Peter Gabriel didn't even see me.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Now, he might not have even been out there in the first half. That's entirely possible. But for me at that moment, that was like getting shot down out of the sky. And I had to come to terms with it, that, they're not looking at me that much, because I don't move, and I'm not out front, I'm not in the light, and what I'm playing is part of the sound picture, but it's not the sound picture. It's in there, and you'd miss it if it wasn't in there.
Right.
Half the time they don't know what I'm doing. That's what the gig is, and that's what the job entails. Is if you don't do it, that's bad. But if you do it, don't expect anybody to come cheering at you, because they can't really tell. Now, one great moment that was the opposite of that was with Eric Clapton. Again at Wembley. We used to do a song called Can't Turn Back the Years. You remember that one?
Of course.
And I wrote this whole synthesizer, like a moody introduction to this song with all these chords and stuff. We did it on the last tour as well. And Eric, he did see me, and he said, I love what you did in the intro to that song. And then he went and he rattled off the chords exactly.
Unbelievable.
He heard every chord and every tonic and every harmonic relationship. He got it.
Wow.
And I was absolutely speechless, because that was just 100% the opposite of the Peter Gabriel thing. He not only heard me, he heard what I was doing and responded to it.
And he obviously knew the music. He knew the song, He knew the song,
but he had never heard this intro before, so it piqued his ear, which was great. But the fact that he not only piqued his ear, he figured it all out.
I mean, wow.
That was just a great moment. So that made up for the Peter Gabriel thing. But those moments are few and far between. Most of the time, a lot of people didn't even know I was in the band.
Wow.
That happened very frequently.
Wow. That's interesting perspective. I would not have thought that, because anytime I watch the videos, and I see you there. I mean, I don't know.
Of course, but when you're surrounded by so much stuff, we got people running around the stage, and on that tour in particular, and on the one that had the round stage, the Dance Into the Light tour, nobody was still for a minute except for me and the drummer, because we were sitting at our instruments. Everybody else was all over the place on the stage.
Oh yeah, that's
physical motion going on that catches the audience's eye.
Yeah. Things
that are static, less so for the drummer, because it's a more physical performance. You see his arms flying, and he's on the screen more often, perhaps. I wasn't on the screen very much, and when I was, it was usually just a picture of my hands. So I actually one time got this plastic hand from this toy from a long time ago. There used to be a TV show called The Addams Family.
Of course, Thing.
And there was a thing called Thing.
Thing. Yeah.
It came out of a box. It was a hand like this. So I would put up this third hand and hold it next to my own so that there were three hands on the keyboard. So for the next time they took a picture of my hands, there were three of them.
Oh, that's hysterical. That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to look for that in some of the videos.
I tried to take it with a sense of humor, but most of the time you saw my hairy knuckles, and that was about it.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to look for Thing if it's on any of the videos.
I don't know. It might have just been the in-house stuff, not the released videos.
Okay, I got you.
I don't think I would ever made the release, but once in a while when I was in a testy mood, I would put this hand up there.
If you ever had one of those millions of photos, you could send me one.
Well, I've got the hand. It's in my acoustic piano upstairs. I still have it.
You've got to send me a picture.
Coming out of the inside of the piano like this.
I love it. So, Brad, if I talked, Leland said he knows the music inside and out, and sometimes he'll just play the stuff from Not Dead Yet. If Phil rang you up today and said, "I loved your interview with Tracy. I want to do another show," would you be ready and would you do it?
Oh, I would definitely do it. I always told Phil he always has my allegiance at any time for anything. I owe him more than I can possibly say, so I would always be there for him.
That's wonderful.
I would be able to do it. I could probably play all the songs on the piano right now, just to play them. But it would take me a little while to get the keyboard set up and ready to play again with all the sounds and all that technical stuff. That would take a while. But I know the show, like Leland does. I mean, Leland can pick up the bass and play it.
Yeah, that's what he said. He goes, sometimes I just do it,
Yeah, I mean, I wish that was as easy for me, but I'd have to reassemble the rig and then, put it all back together again. And there was a whole lot of technical stuff to accomplish to make it look so easy.
Right. Yeah, you make it look easy, and you just, people think you're standing there, but it's just all of that prep work. And
yeah, there's a ton of it. And but the music, I know all the songs. I can't not know them. There's no way I can unlearn Sussudio, and I've tried.
That's hysterical. Do you know that's my license plate, Sussudio? Just to drive you more crazy. So was last question on Not Dead Yet tour, is that Phil's last tour?
I would have to say yes, although you never say never, as you had said to me. And I've said yes before and been wrong. But I really think now he's ready to put it aside, I think. I mean, there might be one-off performances here and there, perhaps, in the future. I've always, when I used to make suggestions to him, which was a long time ago, but one of the suggestions I did was a night with Phil Collins, where he did a much, almost an unplugged set with fewer people, maybe just the rhythm section and perhaps one horn, and talk to the audience, because he can be extremely funny as a raconteur.
Yes.
And I love English humor, and he's got it. And
so funny.
I thought a great evening would be, 2 hours in a theater with a smaller audience, and him sitting in a chair talking about his life and the songs, and us playing them unplugged, kind of acoustically, with no big productions and no big fancy schmancy attached to it. It would be a really fun thing for the audience and for him to do. But I don't think he wants to do anything like that anymore. Maybe this would have happened 20 years ago, perhaps, but
yeah.
Because whenever he went on the Tonight Show, for example, he was hilarious. He was so good with that. He's got great comic timing, and he can tell a story really well.
He does.
And he's got zillions of them, so
right.
I thought that would be a great evening of entertainment. I saw James Taylor do the same thing, and it was great.
Yeah.
He even had a Macintosh laptop running one of those like PowerPoint kind of thing, so you could run slides and pictures, and they were being projected up on a big screen, and would tell funny stories about the pictures. So
that's cool.
Great thing to see. And if you're a fan, it's like you're getting on a little bit of the inside baseball stuff.
Yeah.
You're getting behind the stage again, backstage.
Yeah, I did not know James Taylor did that. That's pretty...
Yeah. It was called the James Taylor One Man Band.
Oh, cool.
Probably 15 years ago.
Huh.
And he just had a pianist, this guy Larry Goldings that he plays with, and then he said, he said, I'm going to do the next song with a drum machine, and then he wheeled out this gigantic Rube Goldberg kind of physical contraption that had, it looked like it was a very steampunk kind of thing.
Sure.
And he turned it on, and it had it was like, you know, that one man band thing where he,
Right.
it was just, it had a mechanical snare drum and a mechanical bass drum and a mechanical cymbal. It was all like this machinery, not a digital drum machine, but an actual physical machine that played drums.
Right.
This thing was about as big as a Volkswagen bus. You know, it was huge.
That's funny.
And I thought that was hilarious. I thought it was just a great bit. I don't know who built that thing, and all it did was go boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick. It couldn't play grooves. It could just,
Right,
barely,
it just kept that beat. That's cool.
Expected steam to come out of it, like a steam engine. So, I mean, I could see Phil doing something like that with his sense of humor.
It'd be great.
But
he's funny. And the audience still loves him. He had the audience in the palm of his hand on the Genesis tour. You know, it doesn't matter that he's seated. It doesn't matter, you know,
no.
He just, I mean, he still does. He's funny, and people, the audience just love him, you know, and he would get the biggest roar. I mean, of course, Mike and Tony, they love them too, but God, the people just loved Phil, and it was
his personality, and it was all there on the last tour. I was so happy to see that he really sprang to life for this. And
he did. He really did. And as the tour
sparkle was back in his eyes again, and he looked really all there and all in. And
he was those. Yeah, I mean, I saw
such a nice thing to see, and he was great. I thought it was funny. His timing was great again, and some of those stories were hilarious, and the bits that he used to do in the old days, he did sitting down, and they were still good.
Yeah.
He
the home by the
had
sea.
it all going for the Genesis tour. It was really nice to see.
It was so fun. So, okay, we're going to power through a bunch of questions that I've asked other people that I've interviewed. And so you can just answer quick if you want, or talk more if you want. It's up to you. But what is your favorite Phil Collins solo song in general? Like just you personally, not to play. If you have,
I would say In the Air Tonight, definitely.
Oh, cool.
That I agree with everybody else. It's the masterpiece of the whole thing. And
it absolutely is.
It's also the song that was responsible for changing so much of pop music.
Yeah, and
a definite game changer and a culture changer when it came around. It was something absolutely brand new at the time. It was a brand new sound, a brand new concept. All new.
The gated drum sound specifically?
All that, but just the drum machine and the ambience and the whole design of it, and saving the drums for the middle of the song. And it's a dramatic construction. Nothing has come close to that since.
I agree.
That's my favorite. It still is.
That's cool. Thank you. That's cool. I like that that urban renewal project, which people really critics did not think well of the project. But I love that the people who did that record, those hip hop and R&B artists, that they recognize Phil's greatness, and I think it's unusual that he isn't recognized for his greatness as much by other genres of music or musicians.
I've heard some of these younger artists mention him.
Yeah, the younger people. Yeah.
You just don't. It's not their thing to talk about their influences so much when they get interviewed these days. But I think almost all of them would agree that his style of writing is one of the bigger influences on everybody's style now.
Well, sure, but I don't know that it's recognized widely, and that's
probably not. But
and it should be.
Well, it should be, and that would be one valid reason that he should be in the Hall of Fame, is that this could be brought out, and it could be feted, I guess, by all these young artists, and who could then testify how important his songwriting and his production styles and everything through the course of his career has affected them. A lot of these people weren't even born when he was a hit. And like I've always maintained that anybody that uses a drum machine which is everybody nowadays, owes a debt to Phil Collins, because he was there first with that.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
all of the rap tracks and all of that stuff that's all based on drum machines started with him.
Yeah.
And but also his style of songwriting, where the track is based on, how can I explain this? The track is based on stable elements like the pads that they're really just kind of there, and they don't change that much. Less about the guitar, more about the keyboards in most cases, I would say, and that was new for its time. You had piano players, Supertramp was a piano-based band, but you didn't have guys who based it on specific synth sounds that became identified with him. You almost could tell immediately which songs, particularly with Genesis, you could tell right away which ones were the ones that were mostly him.
Right.
And which ones were mostly Tony and which ones were mostly Mike. But the ones that were mostly Phil didn't sound a whole lot different than a lot of his solo stuff.
True. Yeah.
Similar elements in all of them because they came from his style.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think that has lived on through the popular culture, through musical culture since, is how influential all that was to everybody else that came afterwards.
Okay, how about your favorite Phil song to perform? If it's different, it may be.
No, it's the same one.
That's the same one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now I know
that's, for one thing, that was always my feature, so it was a little ego juice.
that's your jam.
It goes a long, long way. But also, it's the most satisfying to play.
Yeah. Yeah, because you get to do
keyboards are the most important of the entire evening in that song. So I feel like I'm 100% involved, So I have to say that has to be it.
I love it. I like when he, like for example, at Live Aid, when he performed it and he doesn't have the drum, how dramatic it is when it's just, you just stop playing altogether when the drums are supposed to happen. I love that. Do you ever get to do that? Had you
done that a few times where I played the piano and he sang without drums. So there's silence usually at that spot. He just stops. And then it gets quieter instead of louder.
Yeah.
Which is, playing on people's expectations by doing the opposite of them, and that makes it more interesting at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had done more things together, just piano and him. We did that a bit on the Not Dead Yet tour in the beginning. He did a song by Vera Lynn in the very beginning, and it was just him and me, and it was really fun to do because rarely did I get a chance to perform with him alone.
Yeah.
And those were great moments, but then he just got tired of it, and show was too long and various other reasons. We kind of got rid of it and never did it again. But I wish there had been more of those. We did plenty of them along the way for TV. I played many times with him alone on a Tonight Show, I think, with Daryl perhaps, but certainly in Australia I know we did just a couple of things that were just him and me. The Oscars was just him and me and Daryl.
Yeah, that was...
You'll Be in My Heart, and that was pretty cool.
That was amazing.
When the thing opened up, the curtain opened up, and I just had 1 second to look out and see who was out there. And there was Jack Nicholson and Spielberg and all the,
oh my God,
A++ crowd was in the front row.
Oh.
I had 1 second to check it out, and then we had to start playing, and I couldn't look again. I couldn't ogle like a fan, which is what I wanted to do.
Those are amazing moments.
Yeah, that was a pretty fabulous moment. In fact, I just happened to have on the same Oscar show there was Robin Williams doing the song from South Park movie called Blame Canada.
Yes.
And they had a gigantic production number with all these girls dressed as Mounties. So,
oh, that's fantastic.
I had my picture taken with them.
That is so cool. That's you in the middle?
Yeah, it's me.
That is so cool. Wow. That's cool, Brad. I love that.
Most people had never seen me in the company of women like this, so I thought, whatever the reason, here's an example of it.
That is too cool. So I just did a post all about the No Jacket Required record One of my favorite songs that's from that record, didn't actually appear on it originally, was We Said Hello Goodbye. And that's a very piano-y song. I'm not sure how familiar you may or may not be with it, but did you ever have a chance to play it live? I'm not
I don't
familiar
think
with
so.
you guys. Yeah.
In fact, I don't think I even know how it goes. I probably would recognize it if I heard it, but it
Yeah.
wasn't on it was never on a list of songs to learn,
Yeah.
as I recall.
It's such a beautiful song, and I don't know why. If I ever have a chance to interview him, I want to ask him. He included it on the what was
Love
it on?
songs?
It was on the CD release, I think.
Well, on
Maybe,
the expanded one, the one that's
well, for sure in the 2016 remaster, but oh, actually, it wasn't. Well, it was, but wasn't on the vinyl, either the original vinyl in 85 or the 2016 vinyl. Just wasn't on there. And then it was on the CD release. And it's one of my favorite songs. And I just would always like to ask him, why did you not put it? I mean, who knows? He probably doesn't know why. Just like Against All Odds never made it to anything until it became. So I suppose you just don't ever know. But yeah, anyway. So, okay, how about, I think you have seen him play with Genesis. I think we kind of answered this.
many times.
Yeah, and of course he is a different guy, than he is on the solo tours. I've heard he's a great gift giver, and he's very gracious and generous. You've gotten tour gifts, I assume, and if you're willing to share, are there any certain gifts that you thought were really special that really meant a lot to you?
Oh yeah. Well, they usually at the end of the tour each time there was a gift for everybody from the company, Tony and Phil.
Sorry.
One year in the Sirius tour, they had somebody design this little carousel toy
Yes.
about this big with little figurines of all of us.
I've seen it. Yeah.
And I have that. And
Oh,
my favorite one we ever got was from the Both Sides tour. It's a plastic toilet seat with razor blades embedded in it. And some of the people got plastic toilet seats with barbed wire in it and other variations like that, And there's a little plaque on it that says, "So you can keep playing in the round." Oh, no, it was after '97. It was after
Dance into the
Round
light.
Stage. It was that year. Sorry, it was
Yeah.
that year. So you can keep playing in the round.
That's
And
hysterical.
I have that on my toilet in the bathroom in the studio here. So everybody comments on that.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's
No, they've been awfully generous with us. We had some portraits done one year, caricature portraits done. Um, this past tour, we got a really nice Toomey backpack
Ooh.
it's a Survivor of the Not Dead Yet tour thing on it.
Oh, cool.
And they've been incredibly generous with everybody. Very unusual in the music business, the way they handle their business. They treat everybody well, generously well, and with all kinds of respect. And
That's
it's not as common as you think.
And does that come from, it comes both from Phil and from Tony Smith, you think? This
I
really shared.
Yeah, and I think it might have its basis in the fact that Phil was once a sideman. He knows what it's like to be in the employ of somebody else rather than the big boss.
Yeah.
But Tony is a very smart and aware manager, and he knows that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So
Fair.
he knows that it's only to the advantage of the artist to have the band be happy.
Yeah.
That's so, and the one sure way not to make them happy is to rip them off, and I've seen it happen thousands of times from people. I never understood what's the business sense of that.
Right.
How can it possibly be to their advantage? They get a few bucks out of it, but that's it. They get 10 times the value in ill will.
Right. Yeah,
But
you're not going to.
Phil and Hit and Run's business ethic is extremely high and has always been.
That's great. That's good to hear. I would have assumed so, because you wouldn't be with Phil for 35 years if that wasn't the case.
No, and I think it's so simple to understand that there's no better way to keep people loyal than to treat them with respect.
Mm-hmm.
You treat them with the respect you'd want to be treated with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's not that hard to do. You just
Mm-hmm.
Tony Smith is a really great manager, and has handled everything not only with great ethics but with a lot of brilliance in terms of the way that they marketed things.
Yeah.
Those album covers with the new current pictures, it's a great
So
idea.
cool.
Great
So
idea.
cool.
And
Oh yeah.
that got some buzz going. I mean,
It
he's
was
always
neat.
been
I
very
on the
good at
wall.
finding ways to keep everybody in the loop current.
Yeah.
Keep the product alive and active. And I always liked Tony. I thought he was a straight shooter and a good guy to know, and very
Yeah,
funny too.
he seems like he took really good care of the guys too, and really cared about them, all of them, and looked after, the Genesis guys' careers individually. And yeah, he seems like a neat guy.
Oh, I like
I
him.
wouldn't want to cross him though.
Now you can find an example of that in the Long Goodbye. Is that what it's called?
Yes, that documentary actually stresses me out, Brad, because there
Well,
is
I don't
this.
watch it for that reason. It is pretty stressful.
It is. It really is. Yeah, and
But the scene where we showed up in Israel at the gig and there wasn't even any rigging up. I mean, he turned purple.
Oh yeah, there was in Greece. They didn't have a cherry picker,
Grease.
and he let that guy have it. I was like, well, I would never cross that man.
Yeah, not a good idea.
So
But
yeah,
if you do right by him, he will do right by you, and it's really that simple. But when Tony was involved with this "Bat Out of Hell" musical, did you know that?
I didn't know about the musical, but I did know he had an association with Meatloaf. I think
Well,
I
he
knew
was
that, right?
one of the producers of this Broadway-bound musical based on Meatloaf's music called "Bat Out of Hell."
Okay, yeah.
He invited us to see a pre-premiere performance. In other words, when they were still tuning it up a little, and he was very interested in my opinion. He liked hearing my opinions because I didn't bullshit him. Number one, I was honest about it, and then I'm not saying that he took my particular criticisms to heart, but when I saw the show again, it would have been made better.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
So that usually happens in a show. It's always tweaked before it opens.
Sure.
But he's always treated me with a lot of respect,
Yeah.
and listens to me, which is
Yeah.
nice. I feel like I have something valuable to contribute when he asks me a question about stuff.
Absolutely.
That's great. Love that.
Yeah, no, that's neat. And I think it's great to feel valued, and and he's good. That's good. So I think we talked about your favorite moment working with Phil. We talked a little bit about that. Do you have anything else you want to say? Any other favorite moments that leap to mind?
Well, I have lots and lots of stories, but I have to tell you and whoever's listening to us that I am in the process of organizing materials for a book, and not just about my time with Phil, but about my various escapades through the music business over the years. And it's going to be a funny book, big surprise. And
Awesome.
I'm saving a lot of material for that because some of the good stories about Phil, not about Phil himself, but about my experience with him. I don't want to write a book about telling nasty stories about other people.
Mm-hmm.
This book is really entirely about me and the things that I've done and experiences I've had. But there have been plenty of, which are now, when I look back on them, funny moments, but when they were happening, they were nightmarish moments on stage, mostly having to do with technical issues
Uh-huh.
over the years. I never really had any, never had any knockdown, drag out fights with Phil, ever. Most of the time he was very patient with me when I was having technical problems because he knew I was trying mightily to fix them, But they still make great stories, and eventually, if I ever get this thing done, there will be this book.
Can't wait.
Hopefully I'll have it done by the end of the year. I'm trying to finish it by Christmas, but
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'll let you know, and then the fans, of course, can check it out. But a lot of the stories I tell about Phil will be in there.
Good. Well, we'll get it promoted for sure for you,
Great.
because I think this effort will continue through probably middle of next year. I mean, nominating season I think is the end of the year, and we'll see what happens. We'll
Yeah.
see, and if it doesn't happen this year, we'll keep going. So, do you still keep in touch with Phil to the extent that you might send an email or letter? I know you're not
I
probably.
send an email every now and then. He occasionally responds, but not always.
Mhm.
I imagine he gets deluged every day with stuff, so I don't hold it against him that he doesn't always write back.
Yeah.
But he has, communicates from time to time.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So before you and I say goodbye, and there's a couple more questions to follow,
Oh, please. Go.
was there
Go.
anything that you wanted to talk about or say that we didn't touch on?
I
know.
think so. I think we've covered
We,
everything except my therapy. That's the only thing we haven't gone into. But
I have some more time if you want to. Just kidding.
that's
All
in
right.
the second book, is my therapy stories. But
So the last big question is, you already know that I started this campaign to encourage the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to nominate Phil for his significant contribution to music as a solo artist. And I'm curious, I know you touched a little bit on some of the reasons, but what are his significant contributions to music that you'd like to point out and kind of state for the record?
well, I'll just restate again what I said before, which is that his particular style as a solo artist, different from his style as an artist in Genesis, is the thing I think that almost all young artists in one form or another have not copied necessarily, but been influenced by in the last 25 years. I think that an album like No Jacket Required, almost more than any other, really changed the course of pop music in the decade that came after it. And all of that stuff that happened in the 90s, all of those singers and singer-songwriters that came out, and even if you listen to an album, for example, like a Don Henley album from the late 80s, there's the influence of Phil Collins as well.
Yeah.
And it's not in this, it's not even in the songs themselves, but you can get a flavor. There's a flavor in his music that survives to this day in other people's music. It's like a fragrance almost. It's almost like some kind of emotional thing you can't quantify necessarily, but it's there. And aside from the fact that in the middle of the 1980s you couldn't find a thing on TV that he wasn't in.
Right.
He was, that's why in 1990 he called himself the ubiquitous Phil Collins, which means a guy who's there everywhere, which he was.
Right. And he was.
I don't think it's possible for him not to make a mark, because he was in so many aspects of the culture at that time that he left his mark in almost every aspect of it in certain ways. So I think the thing that most offers an explanation as to why he belongs in the Hall of Fame as a solo artist is that influence survives to this day, right straight throughout pop music, I think. And you might not be able to identify a particular thing about it, but there is a definite flavor to it of his stuff that has survived. And I think if you ask a lot of these young artists, they would say that Phil was one of their early influences. I know I've heard it from some people.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think that would be my answer for that.
I think that's a great answer. Thank you. And I think, I just, I really hope that people start to, they stop with the ubiquitous thing and the pop thing. Sussudio was what it was. I think it's a great song. Like I said, it's my license plate. But because something's popular doesn't mean it's bad. And I think that happened. It was really, really quite something that journalists did in the
all journalists. That's
mid 90s. Yeah. Yeah. And there wasn't any truth in it. And the fact is, the fans never sort of left his side.
Phil had a real love-hate relationship with the press all the time that I can remember in the 80s or in the 90s and the aughts. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're all that way. They treat, there was some critics who hated almost everything except for Bruce Springsteen at the time. That was about the only thing that they would write positively about. Anything that was popular
Right.
and was more pop rather than rock and roll was just really sneered at. And I
Well, and
know
I
he
think,
got sneered at pretty viciously by some of these critics. And in those days, Phil used to respond.
no,
Many
he
times
talks about,
he would be,
yeah.
getting into a spitball contest with these people. And
Yeah.
fortunately, I think he finally got over that.
Yeah.
Thank God,
Yeah.
because it was, to me, it was wasted effort. But
Well, I think,
that's true for almost every pop artist that isn't Bruce Springsteen. And he's not alone. There's plenty of others that had to face the same thing.
yeah. Yeah. Well, Brad, thank you. We spent so much time today, and I know your time is valuable, and I thank you so much
Oh, it's a
for
total
doing this.
pleasure. I had a great time doing this. Thank you very, very much. And
Thank you.